Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillah. Nahmaduhu wa nasta'inuhu wa nastaghfiruh. Wa na'udhu billahi min shururi anfusina wa min sayyiati a'malina. Man yahdihillahu fala mudilla lahu wa man yudlil fala hadiya lahu. Wa ashhadu an la ilaha illa Allah wahdahu la sharika lahu. Wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan 'abduhu wa rasuluh. Amma ba'd. فإن أحسن الكلام كلام الله وخير الهدى هدى محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم وإن شر الأمور محدثاتها وكل محدثة بدعة وكل بدعة ضلالة وكل ضلالة في النار. So alhamdulillah, you've heard a very beneficial lecture from our brother Abu Iyaad, Taqweem, Hafidhahullah, explaining the reality of the madhab of the Salaf as it relates to the names and attributes. And as he mentioned, this is a huge topic, a tremendous topic, and it is not something that we can address in an evening, perhaps even in a weekend. It requires a detailed, sustained level of study to grasp this issue, this topic, and the seriousness of this topic. So what I want to do in my lecture, inshaAllah ta'ala, is I want to deal with some of the historical aspects, some of the aspects of history regarding Allah's names and attributes, how and why differing occurred in this subject, how and why the people deviated from what the messengers brought, and how the nation, the Muslim nation, split in this topic in the 2nd century, at the beginning of the 2nd century after Hijrah, and how those groups which appeared, who erred and deviated, then their foundations remained within the Ummah. Their foundations remained within the Ummah. And there came people after them who inherited those foundations. And they carried those foundations through every century. Up until this time of ours, we see there are present today, as you see, the Ash'aris and the Maturidis. And, there is conflict and controversy and differing with these groups. So we want to try and understand how and why all of this arose. Where did it come from? And to give you a parable, it's useful to give a parable or an example to help to put the idea into your mind. It is a bit like this. If you imagine you are given a jigsaw puzzle, imagine you are given a jigsaw puzzle of 1,000 pieces. And so someone puts them in a bag and gives it to you. And so you have to take the pieces out and look at the pieces and try to figure out what is going on. Do you think it will be easy for you? Answer? Okay. Maybe you might do it after a very, very, very long time. Allah knows best. But if someone shows you the picture, if you have the picture, the entire picture of the jigsaw puzzle, then you can take individual pieces and you can say, well, this one, I know it goes in this area here. There's a bit of sky in this area, there's a blue piece, maybe that will go here. And there's a bit of greenery here, so I can take that piece, these pieces, I know that they fit in this place here. Right? And then there's a bit of greenish blue, that's maybe a river or a sea or an ocean, I'll take these pieces and put them here. So when you see the picture, then you know where each piece, generally you know where it will go, and also then specifically you'll know where it will fit. Is that clear to you? Is that clear to you? So the analogy, the parable, the analogy is that in this topic of Allah's names and attributes, unless you know, unless you have a bird's eye view looking down into history and what happened in this Muslim nation and the various groups which appeared and why they appeared and what they said and why they said, unless you understand all of that and why and how the Salaf responded to them and how they responded back, right? Unless you understand all of that, then in this topic you will not really have good grounding. You'll be confused. And this is why, as we always say, and as Sheikh Salih al-Sheikh mentions a very important point, which is that in order to thoroughly understand aqeedah, you have to understand history. You have to understand the history of why did a particular statement appear. Why did the statement appear? Why did the people say this? And then you have to understand how the Salaf responded to that. And then you have to understand how... So once you understand the origins of these sayings and why people said these things, then you will be able to read the books of the Salaf with greater clarity. They will make more sense to you. You will understand why Ibn Taymiyyah is writing all of these books. Why did he write a book on the talbis of the Jahmiyyah, the deception of the Jahmiyyah? Why did he write a book on the issue of reason and revelation? Do they conflict with each other or do they agree with each other? Why is he writing these books? Or why did the Salaf, why did Imam Ahmad write, for example, Ar-Radd al-Jahmiyyah? Why did al-Bukhari include in his Sahih books which are a refutation of the Jahmiyyah? You will understand, then you will start understanding all of this. All of this will start to make sense. So basically my talk then, I'm going to try to squeeze it all in as much as possible. I don't think I'll achieve that in this evening, but we'll try our best. So my talk is basically intended to provide you this picture. To provide you this picture of the jigsaw puzzle, so you can have a framework. Then you know, well, okay, the maturidiyyah, I know where he fits in. He fits in here, right? The ash'ari, I know where he fits in. He fits in here. The Jahmi, he fits here, right? You take, and then you hear their statements. What a Jahmi says, right? If you say Allah is in a direction, it means He's in the space, which means He's the body. You know, okay, I take this, and this fits in right here, right? And its origin comes from here. Do you understand? This is what we are basically doing. So if you know the general framework or the general picture, the details you can then fill in afterwards. The hardest part is seeing the bigger picture at the beginning. This is what the hardest part is. But once you see the big picture, then every piece of information you come across in this topic of Allah's names and attributes, especially as it relates to the people of bid'ah, people of innovation, and what they are saying, you will know exactly where to put that particular statement of theirs and why they said it and why it is batil. Okay? So this is what, inshallah ta'ala, the aim and the objective is. So we'll start our lecture with the statement of Allah Azza wa Jal at the end of Surah As-Saffat, the 37th surah, the last three verses, and they are tremendous and mighty verses. In them, Allah Azza wa Jal, He says, Subhana rabbika rabbil izzati amma yasifun wa salamun ala al-mursaleen walhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. There is a tremendous amount of fiqh within these three verses. And Ibn Kathir, rahimahullah ta'ala, he comments upon this and he says, ينزه تبارك وتعالى نفسه ويقدسها ويبرئها عما يقول الظالمون المكذبون المعتدون تعالى وتنزه وتقدس عن قولهم علوا كبيرا. He says, so basically there are three ayat in this passage. First of all, Ibn Kathir says that Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala, He purifies Himself and He sanctifies Himself and He declares Himself free and innocent from whatever is said by the dhalimun, the oppressive people, the mukaddibun, the liars, al-mu'tadun, and those who are transgressors. Allah is lofty and exalted and sanctified and pure and free and innocent from their statement with a great and mighty uluwan kabira. He is lofty above that in a great way. وَلِهَذَا قَالَ تَبَارَكَ وَتَعَالَى سُبْحَانَ رَبِّكَ رَبِّ الْعِزَّةِ. For this reason, Allah, the Blessed and the Most High, said, Subhana Rabbik, how free and sublime is your Lord, the Lord of might. Amma yasifun, from that which they describe. So in the first verse, Allah Azza wa Jal is negating every type of description, every type of speech, everything which has been said by the people who came before the revelation of the Quran, by any of the nations, whether it is the Yahud or the Nasara, the Jews or the Christians, or the Sabi'ah, those who are the star worshippers, or it is the Mushrikun from the Arabs, other than the Arabs, or whether it is the Falasifa, the philosophers of old, all the things that they said. In this ayah, everything that has been said previously, outside of the message of the prophets, it has been negated in this ayah. And Allah declares Himself above and beyond and sanctified from any and all of that. Secondly, in the next verse, He says, وَسَلَامٌ عَلَى الْمُرْسَلِينَ, which means, and peace or safety is upon the messengers. So Ibn Kathir says, أي سلام الله عليهم في الدنيا والآخرة لسلامة ما قالوه في ربهم وصحته وحقيته. So he says, meaning that there is the protection or the safety of Allah upon them in this life and hereafter, due to the salama, meaning that what they said about their Lord, it is sound and secure and safe, and it is authentic and it is true. So meaning that now everything else that was said about Allah Azza wa Jal by all the previous people, it is negated. And then He established that the prophets, they are the ones who are safe and secure in whatever they say about Allah Azza wa Jal, in what they describe Allah Azza wa Jal with. So this now establishes that the route to knowledge, the route to the knowledge of Allah is from whom? From what? It is through authentic revelation. Authentic revelation. And in this case, it is only the Quran. Because now the Quran has, the previous books are, they are invalidated, they are abrogated because of the distortion and so on and so forth. And the only route to knowledge is revelation, which is the Quran, which we can call naqal. Naqal means transmission. Right? Or another way is as-sam'. As-sam' means that which we hear. That which we hear of revelation. So the Quran is naqal, it is transmission from the Messenger of Allah, from Allah Azza wa Jal. And as-sam', another word for it, which means that which we hear, meaning of revelation. So this is the only route to acquiring knowledge of Allah Azza wa Jal. And this is why Allah Azza wa Jal declared the messengers to have salam, to have salama. Then thirdly He said, Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. And all praise is due to Allah, the Lord of the worlds. Meaning, Lahul Hamd fil ula wal akhirah fi kulli halin. Meaning, to Him belongs the praise in the beginning and in the hereafter, in every situation or in every state. And since notice in this passage, Allah Azza wa Jal mentioned two things: at-tasbih, subhana rabbik, and alhamd. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. These two words together, they indicate two things. First of all, Allah is free of all deficiencies. Subhana rabbik. Subhana rabbik. How free and innocent and remote and sanctified and sublime is your Lord from every type of deficiency. This is Subhana Rabbik. And in the third verse, Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, Alhamd is given to attributes of perfection. So in the third verse, Allah Azza wa Jal affirms for Himself the attributes of perfection. Think about this ayah now. And the scholars actually discuss this ayah in their works along the lines that I'm mentioning. That you see in this ayah, in this passage, there are a number of things. First of all, that Allah Azza wa Jal, when we describe Him and speak of Him, it is through two methods. We negate from Him all deficiencies. We negate from Him all false speech. And secondly, we affirm for Him all of His perfect names and attributes. And how do we do that? Only by way of the messengers and what they bring of ilm, which is knowledge, and nur, which is light, and huda, which is guidance, and tibyan, which is clarity, and so on and so forth, which are descriptions of the Quran and descriptions of the guidance that was brought by the prophets and by the prophets and the messengers. So, is this first point clear to everybody? Clear to everybody? Because we need to. There's a lot to take in, inshallah, and a lot to follow. Okay. So once this is clear now, the next thing we want to do then is we need to distinguish between two groups of people. We need to distinguish between two groups of people. So we're going to put one group of people here on the right and another group of people here on the left. Right? So the first group of people on this side, on the right, on my right, we will say that they are the prophets and messengers. The prophets and messengers of Allah Azza wa Jal. What do they bring? What do they bring? What do they have? What do they have? Wahi. Perfect. Wahi. They have wahi from Allah Azza wa Jal. And since Allah Azza wa Jal has mentioned to us in His book, وَمَا خَلَقُتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسَ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ, I have not created men and jinn except that they may worship me. And He also said, يَا أَيُّهَا النَّاسُ اعْبُدُوا رَبَّكُمْ الَّذِي خَلَقَكُمْ وَالَّذِينَ مِنْ قَبْلِكُمْ لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ. O mankind, worship your Lord who created you and those who came before you in order that you may acquire piety. And every messenger said to his people, يَا قَوْمِ اعْبُدُوا اللَّهِ مَا لَكُمْ مِنْ إِلَهٍ غَيْرُهُ. O my people, worship Allah. You have no other deity besides Him. So since creation is for the purpose of us worshipping Allah, then that worship of Allah can only be actualized upon authentic knowledge regarding Allah. And that authentic knowledge regarding Allah can only come by way of wahi. Wahi. And this is because even though Allah has put within each person the fitrah is something by which we know that there must be a creator. There must be a creator. And the fitrah is something that compels us, it makes us want to worship this creator. But we only have a very general knowledge of Allah by way of the fitrah. We know He exists, we know He is the creator, and maybe we can figure out some basic attributes that He has knowledge, He has life and things like this. But this cannot give us this does not amount to a detailed knowledge about Allah Azza wa Jal. And therefore it is the prophets and the messengers in what they convey of revelation which tells us what to believe about Allah. What are the names? What are His names? What are His attributes? What are His actions? And what can we not describe Him? What is He innocent of? What is He free of? What is He, what does He deny from Himself? And this knowledge is only something which comes from the prophets and messengers. Is this clear? Now we will move to the next thing. The prophets and messengers, the messengers of Allah, have three qualities. They have three qualities, and make note of these qualities. First of all, they are a'lamun nas. A'lamun nas billahi tabarak wa ta'ala. First of all, they are the most knowledgeable of Allah's creation about Allah. Is this true or not? Is there anyone more knowledgeable than the prophets and messengers about Allah? No. Secondly, they are afsahun nas. Afsahun nas, which means that they are the most eloquent of people in speech when they speak about Allah. When Allah Azza wa Jal revealed, for example, the Torah to Musa alayhi salam, was there anything more eloquent in speech than the Torah? Answer? No. The Quran which Allah revealed to the Messenger Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, is there anything more eloquent? Is there anyone more eloquent than Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam amongst the Arabs of the Arabic language and of the Quran? No. So the prophets and messengers are afsahun nas. They are the most eloquent of people because it is revelation from Allah. And thirdly, they are ansahun nas. Ansahun nas. They are the most eager and desirous of people of wanting good to the people to whom they are conveying the knowledge. Right? They are sincere in wanting to guide the people. Is this not the case? Is there anyone more concerned and more zealous for the guidance of this ummah than Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam? Is there anyone more zealous and more desirous of guidance than the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam? No. So these then are the three qualities. These are the qualities of the prophets and messengers of Allah. The reason why I am mentioning all of this is because when we come later on to look at the statements of the people of misguidance, you will see that the reality of their statements, the reality of their principles, when you peel all the layers of the onion, you peel one layer, there's another one, then you peel that one, there's another one, then you peel that one, you come right to the middle and to the core, you will see that what they are really saying is that the messengers were ignorant. Ajhalun nas. And they are saying that the messengers of Allah were not the most eloquent of people. And they are saying that they were not the most desirous of guidance for the people to whom they were sent. This is the reality of what they are saying. Once you pierce through all of the smoke and the mist and the layers which are on top of their statements and words, this is the reality of what they will be saying. And this will become clear as we proceed further and further. So, this now leads us to discuss another two things. We are still speaking about the prophets and messengers, right? Once all of this is clear and revelation comes to you, what is the first obligation? What is the first wajib upon any person?
Listen and obey. Tawheed.
Tawheed, correct answer. First obligation is to make the shahadatan. The first wajib in Islam is to establish, to declare your faith in Allah and to express the shahadatan. This is the first obligation. Why? Because first of all, you already have the fitrah. You know Allah exists. And so there is nothing for you except to say, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah. And then to learn your religion and to acquire knowledge of the aqeedah, of the names, attributes of Imam, and to learn the ahkam and the ibadat and to worship Allah. This is the first obligation, right? And secondly, how do we come to know Allah? Is it obligatory to know Allah by way of revelation? Or is it obligatory to know Allah by way of reason, by aql? What's the answer? By what? By revelation. Right? And we'll look at the proofs for that later on, inshallah ta'ala. For now, I just want to distinguish between the prophets and messengers over here, on this side, and another group on this side. Right? So, putting all of this together now, Allah Azza wa Jal created mankind to worship Him. He made it easy for them to worship Him because He put within them the fitrah. The fitrah is something by which we instinctively know that there is a creator. We don't need to think about it. We don't need to reason. We just know and we feel that there is a creator. Allah put this, from His mercy, He put this in mankind. Then He sent prophets and messengers with knowledge about Himself in a detailed manner. His names, His attributes, His actions, by way of messengers who are a'lamun nas wa afsahun nas wa ansahun nas, the most knowledgeable and the most eloquent and the most sincere in wanting guidance for the people to whom they were sent. And on account of all of this, we know that the first obligation is to declare your belief in Allah and to worship Him alone. And it is obligatory to know Allah by way of revelation, not by reason. Is all of this clear to you now? Right? So therefore a Muslim, he turns to the prophets and messengers, he turns to the revealed books, and he learns what Allah has mentioned about himself, about his names, his attributes, and what Allah has denied from himself of deficiencies and shortcomings, that for example he has a son, or that he becomes tired, or that he's unaware, and all of these things which are deficiencies. So he negates them and he affirms perfections for himself. And from that we acquire knowledge of Allah as he intended, as he wanted, and we worship him. Why? Because this knowledge, it creates these feelings in our hearts. It creates love, hope, fear, reliance, remorse, and so on and so forth. And so this ilm is something that leads us and helps us to worship Allah upon Tawheed. Right? So now we have finished discussing the prophets and the messengers and what they bring. It is wahi. Wahi, or it is naqal. We say naqal. Naqal means that which is being transmitted. On this side, we have another group of people, and we will call them the philosophers. Right? The philosophers. And specifically, I mean the Greek philosophers. Right? These are people like Plato and Aristotle. You've probably heard of these people, and they are taught in the schools and so on and so forth. And this is crucial to understand, because we want to contrast between the prophets and messengers on the one hand and how they guide the people, and these people over here who are the philosophers. Right? How do the philosophers, how do they speak about the world and about the things that they cannot see? They use what? They use what? Aql. They use reason. Right? So what these philosophers, what they did is they said that we want to have a rational understanding of the creator or the originator. Right? How can we rationally understand who is this being or this thing that we know is governing the universe? Right? And how can we acquire knowledge of him? Remember, these people are misguided people. There is no book sent to them. They are star worshippers. They are polytheists. They are idolaters. And they just use their aql to try to understand the world and to try to understand things that they cannot see. Right? And so they basically said, aql is the foundation of all knowledge. Is this true? Is this true? Is aql the foundation of knowledge about Allah? No, it's not. We've already established that it is wajib to know Allah by way of naql, wahi. Yes? We already established that. These people, the general principle they have is that it is it is basically the only sound basis of knowledge. The only way we can get sound knowledge is by using this. Right? And this is something which is said by all of the philosophers and disbelievers and atheists in all times and ages. They say the same thing. Like today, you have scientists and they say, yes, the scientific method and reason is the only route to knowledge. Is this correct? No. Batil. False. It's not correct. But this is the basic principle. This is the basic principle that they said. And so what they began to do is they began to speak about this being that they thought was behind the universe. Right? And they started writing books called Physics and Metaphysics. Physics is things that we can see, and metaphysics is things that we can't see, and what is their nature and so on and so forth. So to cut a long story short, I'm going to summarize it. I'm going to mention to you how they described this being that they thought was behind the universe. I'm going to give you the summary of what they said, and pay attention to these words. So they said, and all of this is known and established. It's not subject to dispute. It's not something that I'm making up. It's rigorously studied. Their books are there. They are translated. There's academic papers on this. This is all known and understood. And really, the Ash'aris and Maturidis, the ones at the very top of the pyramid, they know exactly what is being said here. They know and understand what is being said here, and they know this full well. Right? But the ones who are underneath, in the middle layer of the pyramid, and the blind followers at the bottom, they are basically clueless about all of this. They don't know any of this. Right? But the ones right at the top, they know, when they hear this speech, they will know that we know what they are upon and what they're about. Right? So, listen to the speech of Aristotle and Plato, how they are describing the divine, meaning that being that they believe is behind the universe. They say, he is without a body. Without a body. Doesn't have a body. He doesn't, without limit. Doesn't have any limits. He is without change. He cannot change. He does not have mutability. He's immutable. What does this mean? That he can't change. He's fixed. He is without parts. He's not divisible. He doesn't have any parts. He is not subject to time. He's not confined by time, confined by space. Can you start to understand this language now? Do you understand this language? Because this language is what you will see in the books of the Ash'aris and Maturidis. This is where it's coming from, right? It's coming from that source. So we'll make the link later on, inshallah ta'ala. So they're saying this being is without a body, he's without parts, and he's without passions. By passions, they mean things like loving and being pleased and being angry and things like this. So basically, these Greek philosophers, this is their language in terms of how they described the being that they thought was behind the universe. Right? He's not confined by space, not confined by time, he's not a body, he's not divisible, he's not this, he doesn't have any attributes, we can't think of an attribute in our mind for him. Do you understand? All of this, basically, if you think about it, they are rejecting any description for Allah, and they are saying that really it's just something that you think of in your mind, that He is one. Right? Without any names, without any attributes, and so this is the type of language that these people basically spoke of. Now this is in the 4th century before Isa alayhi salam, right? 4 centuries before Isa alayhi salam. Aristotle, Plato were in that basic period of time. So then what happened is that this idea or this speech and this language of Plato and Aristotle, the Jews and the Christians and the Sabi'ah, they acquired this language and they acquired these ideas and they began to speak about Allah in exactly the same way. So meaning that this type of knowledge, this type of language is something that the previous nations fell into before the people of Islam fell into it. Right? So meaning that the people like the Ash'aris and Maturidis and the Jahmiyyah and the Mu'tazila, they are not something new among the nations. They are not something new among the nations. This is something which already happened to the Jews. It happened to the Christians and it happened to the Sabi'ah. And these things that we are speaking of about ta'wil and tafweed and so on and so forth, which are these mechanisms, this is not something new. This already existed amongst the Jews and amongst the Christians many hundreds of years before Islam even came. And therefore, if you go and you research in the academic papers and in history books and so on and so forth, again, all of this is well known and established and clear. I will give you some names. For example, there was a Jewish rabbi by the name of Philo-Judaeus of Alexandria, in Egypt, Alexandria. He died in the year 50 after, in the Christian era, meaning that he was alive in the time of Isa alayhi salam. And this man, in his books, when you read his books, you will find the same things and the same type of language that you will find today in the books of the Ash'aris and the Maturidis. Right? Allah is not a jism. Allah is not a body. Allah is not an Arab. Allah is not an accident or an incidental attribute. Allah is not in place. Allah is not in a location. Allah is not this. Allah is not that. This is what we call negative theology. You only describe Allah in negatives. You only say what He isn't rather than saying what He is. Because if you say what He is, you've likened him to the creation. Do you understand the basic idea now? Right? So this is something that was already present amongst those Greeks, Plotinus and others like that. And so this Philo, he's speaking with the same language. 800 years, 700 years before Jahm bin Safwan, the Jahmiyyah, the Mu'tazila, the Kullabiyah, the Ash'ariyah, the maturidiyyah. Right? Then after him, you have amongst the Christians, they become affected by the same thing. There is Clement of Alexandria in the 3rd century after Isa alayhi salam, speaking exactly the same language. God is without parts, without a body, without, is not divisible, is not mutable, and so on and so forth. The same type of language. Not a jism, not an arad, is not subject to hawadith. All of this philosophical babble, philosophical nonsense that they took from the Greek philosophers. Right? So if you read his works, then you go and read, for example, the books of these Asha'iris and Maturidis, it's exactly the same language. Then you have after him a person called St. Augustine of Hippo, I believe, the place where he's from. Exactly the same thing. He's basically in the 5th century. This is only now 3 centuries before Islam. Exactly the same type of language. Right? And this is because they were affected by those Greek philosophers who said we use reason to decide what the creator is and what he isn't. And then on the basis, and they are obviously just misguided polytheists and idol worshippers who are speaking about ignorance, then the Jews took that, and the Christians took that, and the Sabi'ah, they took that as well. The Sabi'ah are basically people to whom Ibrahim al-Islam was sent, but they remained in those lands for centuries and centuries and centuries, and they were still present when Islam came. And they were present in the Muslim lands. So, now the point is, can you see the difference between what's over here? What's over here? It is wahi. Yes? Wahi through the prophets and messengers. What's over here? Huh? What is it built upon? Jahl. Jahl. The whisperings of the shayateen. Right? Speculation. Right? And all of this nonsense. Right? That was taken then by the nations. By the Yahud. By the Nasara. By the Sabi'ah. And this now was present amongst the people when Islam came. Is that clear to you? That these ideas were present. It's not something new. It was already there. And one of the famous Christian theologians was a man by the name of John of Damascus. He was present in the time of Islam. Right? John of Damascus in Damascus. After 100 Hijrah. And this man had exactly the same speech. What you hear from the Jahmiyyah and the Mu'tazila and the Ash'aris and the Maturidis. With respect to Allah's names and attributes. The same type of language. Exactly the same. So the point being now, here we have the revelation which the Messenger has come with. And then we have those misguided polytheist idol worshippers and star worshippers. And what they came out with of that language. Then you have these nations who are affected by it. And they are now present. They are now present amongst the Muslims. Did you know that Yahudi who poisoned the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, what's his name? What's his name? Labid bin al-A'sam al-Yahudi, the one who poisoned the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He was a learned scholar, and you know what he said? He said the Torah is created. The Torah is created. He said this before the Mu'tazila came and said the Quran is created. Why did he say this? He said it on the basis of that same Greek philosophical baggage and babble that the Jahmiyyah and the Mu'tazila acquired. And which then the Ash'aris and Maturidis then took after that. They came and they took the same thing. Right? So now maybe you've got a clearer picture now. You've got a clearer idea of what's going on. Right? The Messenger of Allah has come with revelation from Allah Azza wa Jal. And in the Quran there is Ithbat and Nafi. Ithbat is whatever Allah affirms for himself of names. Ar-Rahman, Ar-Rahim, Al-Malik, Al-Quddus, and so on and so forth. And attributes, his knowledge, his will, his power, his qudra, his face, his mercy, and so on and so forth. And then he negates from it, and likewise his actions of creating and ascending above the throne, and so on and so forth. And likewise he negates from himself all imperfections. This is the knowledge that we take from Allah Azza wa Jal about himself. Then there's this other stuff floating around, which is all built upon jahl and hawa and the whisperings of the shayateen. And there are people surrounding the Muslim nation who are basically speaking with this type of language. And that's why we said to you, the verse that we mentioned at the very beginning, Subhana Rabbik, Rabbil Izzati Amma Yasifun, wa Salamun ala al-Mursaleen, walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. You have to keep those ayat in mind as we move through this history, because their relevance will become clear to you, the relevance of these verses. So, now that this is clear, we now want to move on. In fact, before we move to the next stage, I want to read a statement here from Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah ta'ala. And this is at the beginning of the second volume of Kitab an-Nubuwat. It's a great, fantastic book. And at the beginning of this book, he says, he's speaking now about the usul of the religion. How do we take the usul of our religion? He says, قَدْ ذَكَرْنَا فِي غَيْرِ مَوْضِعٍ أَنَّ أُصُولَ الدِّينِ الَّذِي بَعَثَ اللَّهُ بِهِ رَسُولَهُ مُحَمَّدًا صلى الله عليه وسلم قد بينها في القرآن أحسن بيان وبين دلائل الربوبية والوحدانية ودلائل أسماء الرب وصفاته وبين دلائل نبوة أنبيائه وبين المعاد بين إمكانه وقدرته عليه في غير موضع. I'll translate inshallah, because it's a lengthy passage. I'll get the gist of the meaning to you. He's saying basically that the foundations of our religion, the usul of our religion, which Allah sent the messenger with, the Quran has explained them in the most excellent of manner. And the Quran has explained all of the evidences for his rububiyyah, for his wahdaniyah, for his names and attributes, and for all the other things about the correctness of his the truthfulness of his prophets, and about resurrection, in the best of ways, with evidences, clear rational evidences. And therefore Allah has made clear all of the usul of the religion, which is the deen of Allah, and He has therefore conveyed beneficial knowledge and righteous action. This is what we believe. Is this not true? Do you believe that Allah has given us perfect guidance? No. Do you believe or not? Do you believe the Quran and the Sunnah have given us everything that we need to worship Allah and to have sound knowledge of Him and to worship Him alone? And also in terms of how do we argue for the foundations of our religion? Do you believe Allah has provided all that? Yes. This is most certainly and definitely the case. So far, what have we established? I want someone to tell me from the audience, what are the things that we've established so far before we now move to the next stage? Anybody want to offer? Fadl.
First thing we established, barakallahu fikum, that the first you mentioned in the last Surah As-Saffat, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala praised Himself and He praised the prophets and He negates any differences for Himself, and He affirmed perfection for Himself. He said, Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Also you established Ahsanallahu ilaykum that generally speaking that we have the prophets and messengers who came with the wahi, and in order to speak about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala you need the wahi from Him subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we have other people on the other side, the philosophers, who claiming they are using the aql, who are clearly going against the prophets and messengers. And you establish Ahsanallahu ilaykum that this aqeedah existed way before Islam, and it has been taken from the Plato and Aristotle. Also you mentioned about Ruwayd al-A'sam, that he's the first person who, not first person, but he was the one who poisoned the Messenger of Islam. He was spreading that Torah is created, and he took it from the philosopher.
Okay, so you basically have a general picture now that there is revelation from Allah which is brought by the messengers, and our knowledge about Allah is by way of wahi, it is not by way of reason, right? And we said on the other hand there are the misguided, straying, wandering, blind people like the falasifa who were there before, centuries before Islam, and they were just using their aql to try to think think about how the being that they believe is behind the creation what he is like. And they came up with this language, right? And this described him in this way, that he's not in a place, he's not in a direction, he's not in a location, he's not divisible, he's not in parts. And this type of philosophical language is the same language that you see in the books of the Ash'aris and the Maturidis. This is basically where it's coming from, right? So there are only two ways. Now we're going to move to the second part of our lecture now. There are only two ways. Either you are a follower, in fact there are only two positions. Either you are a follower of the prophets and messengers, either you are following them 100%, and if you are not, then you are on this camp. You're on this side. There is no other way. So either you are here following the prophets and messengers and following the methodology that they brought, and you are speaking about Allah on the basis of that. If you're not there 100%, you will be in that direction over there. Was that clear to you? There are only two positions, either here or over there. There's no other third position. Alright? This now brings us now to discuss the early history of Islam and how this idea now entered into the Muslim nation. Right? And what we will establish is that there is a group of people who are known as ahlul kalam. You heard this word. I'm sure everybody's heard this kalam. The people of kalam, ilmul kalam, al-mutakallimun. You probably heard all of this, right? And this, we'll call this a family, a number of groups of people, the ahlul kalam, the ilmul kalam. Can someone tell me, just give me one group each. I want to get all the names of the groups of these people who enter into the people of kalam. Okay, we have Mu'tazila, one group. Jahmiyyah, another group. Ash'aris, ashaa'irah. Kullabiyah. Who else? Maturidiyyah. Any others? Salimiyyah. Another one more? Huh? No. Karramiyah. We have the Karramiyah, right? You might have heard some of these names. You probably heard of Ash'aris, Maturidis, obviously. Some of them you might not have heard of. What about the Hishamiyah? Hishamiyah are Rafida, Shia. In the 2nd century, they were affected by this as well. Huh? Not quite. Maybe there's some overlap, but not quite. So basically we have these 6 or 7 names. Jahmiyyah, Mu'tazila in order. Jahmiyyah, Mu'tazila in the 2nd century. Kullabiyah, Karramiyah in the 3rd century. Ash'ariyah, Maturidiyyah, Salimiyah in the 4th century. Right? All of them, we refer to them as what? Ilmul Kalam. Ahlul Kalam. What is this Ilmul Kalam? It is from where? The language of these people. That's what it is. The language of these people used to describe Allah and to speak about Allah. This is what the people of Kalam are. They've taken this as the foundation. They've said, right, we're going to take the language of these people and we're going to try to argue in favor of Islam. Do you understand what they were trying to do? They're saying basically that we're going to take the science and the language and the philosophy of these people. We're going to take these tools. Then we're going to try to argue using these tools to prove that Allah exists and to prove the prophethood of the prophets and to prove resurrection. Can you now see the danger in this? Can you see the danger? Can you see the danger in this? You're going to take the tools, the language, the conceptual baggage of these people, accepting that it has sound foundations. Then you're going to take it, then you're going to try to prove Islam by way of it. This is the basic idea between the people of Kalam. This is what the basic idea was. This is what they were trying to do. Jahm bin Safwan, the Mu'tazila, the Kullabiyah, the Ash'ariyah, the Maturidiyyah. This is basically what they were trying to do. Right? And because of this great mistake that they made, tremendous mistake that they made, this is what then led them and forced them to start denying the names and attributes of Allah Azza wa Jal. Right? because there was a clash, there was a conflict, right? What they were doing was they were trying to use this language to prove that Allah exists. But the argument they were using, it was contradicted by the Quran, because in the Quran, Allah says He has attributes, Allah says He has actions, and this was contradicting the argument they were using. So they had to make a choice. They had to make a choice. Which one do we give precedence? Do we put reason higher and make the Quran subservient to it? Or do we put the Quran higher and basically say, well, this method is basically false, we're going to leave it? Do you understand? Right? This was the question, this was the choice that they had to make when they started using this philosophy and this language. Right? Because it clashed with the Quran. So what did they decide? They said, actually, basically, we're going to accept this language and terminology to be the truth because we are proving Allah's existence by way of it. And as for the Quran, well, what we're going to do is going to look at the Quran and we're going to basically explain away the verses. So any verses which contradict, we're going to basically make ta'wil of them, and this is where the origin of ta'wil comes from. This is why they wanted to make ta'wil of the verses of the Quran, because it conflicted with the argument they were using, the argument they developed, which they took from the language of the philosophers. Right? This is why today you see the Jahmi or the Mu'tazili is, making ta'wil of the book of Allah. Oh yes, it is Ar-Rahmanu ala al-arsh istawa. No, it doesn't mean that. It means something else. Why is he doing this? What's making him do this? There's a reason. Obviously there's a reason behind it. What's the reason? It's because this baggage he's picked up, right? He's using this baggage to make a rational proof to show Allah exists. But in order for this proof to be correct, it means that what is in the Quran, that Allah has attributes, Allah has actions, it can't really be reconciled with this. So we have to do one of two things. Either say the argument is wrong, or say that the Quran, there must be something in the Quran. We have to basically, these verses, it is tajseem and tashbih, and it makes Allah like to be like a body. So we have to now deal with these verses. How do we deal with these verses? This is where ta'wil comes from. And later on, this is where tafweed comes from. Later after that as well. Right? They had loads of different mechanisms to try and play with the Quran, play with the Sunnah. Right? This is basically what's going on. So what we're going to do now is try to, in a quick as manner as possible, explain the origin of these groups. Right? So first of all, let's start with Jahm bin Safwan. This is now in the 2nd century after Hijrah. In the 1st century, we know that there were some major groups which appeared: the Khawarij, the Rafidah, the Qadariyah, and the Murji'ah. Right? These are the 4 groups which appeared in the 1st century of Islam. The first 4 deviated groups. Right? So we passed that point. We're now coming into the 2nd century. At the beginning of the 2nd century. In this time period, there are individuals who are basically mixing with the Yahud, with the Nasara, with the Sabi'ah, traveling to these places. This is Al-Ja'ad bin Dirham, and Al-Jahm bin Safwan, who was a student of Al-Ja'ad bin Dirham. They are going, they are arguing, they are debating, right? And this method of arguing and debating about the religion, this is not from our deen. Our deen is submission to the texts. Whatever Allah said, whatever His Messenger said, what the Sahaba were agreed upon, ijma'. We submit to that. This is how we acquire our religion. Our religion is not by debating, arguing, disputation, controversy. Right? This is not from our way. So these people, these individuals, were people who were basically engrossed in this argumentation, debating, and so on and so forth. And they would go and debate with the Yahud, with the Nasara, with the Sabi'ah. They would travel to different places like Harran and Damascus and so on and so forth. Right? And they would debate. And as a result of this debating, they picked up this baggage. Al-Ja'ad bin Dirham, he picked up this baggage. This baggage about speaking about Allah, with this language. Allah is not in a place, not in a location, not in a direction, He can't be seen, He can't be perceived, He not divisible, not changeable, not mutable, all this nonsense, philosophical baggage, right? He picked this up from the people around him. Then he passed this on to Jahm bin Safwan. And Jahm bin Safwan, when he acquired this, this is when, in the time of the Salaf, time of Ayyub as-Sakhtiyani, and the early, the Imams of the Salaf, they were present in this time. And then Jahm bin Safwan and his followers, he started developing a group of followers. And these followers, they had interactions with the people of the Sunnah. And there are many, many statements, maybe 10 or so statements from Ayyub as-Sakhtiyani and many others from the Salaf around this time. And when they were having discussions with these Jahmiyyah, they realized that there's something these people are trying to say, but they're not really saying it. Right? And so that's why we have statements from Ayyub as-Sakhtiyani and others. They're saying that the Jahmiyyah are revolving around the statement that there is no Lord above the heaven. Right? The Salaf already became aware and wise to what is going on. That these people have picked up something, some language, some baggage, something, and they are saying things, and it seems from what we're hearing from them that what they're really trying to say is that there is no Lord above the heaven. But they weren't really saying it, because that would be clear, manifest kufr if they were to say it openly to the Salaf, but they didn't say it. At that time they couldn't say it. Right? And the reason why they were saying this, it comes back to that baggage. They're saying, well, if Allah is above, then above means a direction, and a direction means space, and if something is in a space, it means it's occupying a place, and if it's a place, it means, if it's occupying a place, it means it must be a body. See all this poisonous nonsense that they're coming up with, right? It must be in a body. And to say Allah is a body is tajseem. It is kufr, because you've likened him now to all the bodies. Where have they taken this from? Where is this from? Is this from any revealed book? Did any messenger speak with this? Did any Sahabi speak with this? Did Imam Malik speak with this? Did Abu Hanifa speak with this? Who spoke with this? No one. No one from the people of ilm, people of knowledge, people of guidance. And so this is what they were trying to say in that time period, because they were poisoned with this basic language. So the Jahmiyyah now began to appear as a group, and they began to start saying these things. And these things are from the major symbols of our belief. Where is Allah? Allah is above His creation, above His throne. He stated it clearly in the Quran and in the texts. How can you... So at this stage they were not openly denying this stuff. Right? They were just speaking in a manner where you think, it's not clear what they're saying, but that's what they are basically implying. Now, another thing that they began to deny as well is that Allah will not be seen in the hereafter. We won't see Allah in the hereafter. Why is this? Why did they say this? They said it because, well, to look at something, to see something, you have to look towards it. And if you're looking towards something, you're looking in a direction. And we're back to the same nonsense. And if you're looking in the direction, there must be something in that space. And that space must be occupied, not occupied. All of this is what's in the writings of that idolater, mushrik, star worshipper Aristotle. That's where all of this is from. Right? Place, direction, location, all this gibberish and nonsense. But this is what they were coming out with. So they basically said, hang on, believers seeing Allah in the hereafter, I don't think so, because this would mean Allah is a body, and this is kufr. So we can't accept these narrations. Do you understand? That's what they're basically saying. And likewise, they began to say as well, hold on, if Allah speaks with speech, then it means He's changed. Something's changed in His essence. How can He have speech? Because if He speaks with something, then it means something has changed with Him. Because He's speaking something that He never said before. Right? So now, remember, it goes back to what Aristotle was saying about the first cause or the first being is unchangeable, immutable, is not subject to change or events. This is where they're getting this from as well. So they said, Allah doesn't have any attributes like speech. Because if He had these attributes, it would mean that He is created and He's subject to change. Right? So Allah can't speak. Therefore, how do we explain this Quran? What is this Quran then? If Allah doesn't speak and can't speak and doesn't have the attribute of speech, how do we explain what this Quran is? This Quran must be something created. Do you understand? Do you understand how they've come to this conclusion? Right? Because to them, Allah can't have attributes, because he'd be like the creation. Allah can't speak as and when he wills, because this now would make him subject to change and events. So therefore, Allah can't speak, and therefore this Quran must be something that is just created. It's a created thing, right? So they began to also speak with the creation of the Quran. And this is where the Mu'tazila took this from, right? At the end of the 2nd century of Islam. So from this, can you start seeing now the various statements of the Jahmiyyah and where they came from? Is that clear to you, where it's coming from, what the origin of this is? Yeah. The statements that they began to make. And I'm going to read to you a number of statements from some of the Salaf regarding what I said before. This is a statement from Ahmad bin Zayd. Ahmad bin Zayd قال سليمان بن حرب سمعت حماد بن زيد يقول, and Hamad bin Zayd is from the Imams of the Salaf. He died in the year 179 Hijrah. He said, إنما يدورون على أن يقولوا ليس في السماء إله. They are revolving around the issue. They are wanting to say that there is no Lord above the heaven. There is no deity above the heaven. Ayyub as-Sakhtiyani died 131 after Hijrah. He said, as is narrated from Hamad bin Zayd, سمعت أيوب السختياني وذكر المعتزلة وقال إنما مدار القوم على أن يقولوا ليس في السماء شيء. He said, I heard Ayyub as-Sakhtiyani say, and he mentioned the Mu'tazila. And he said, the Mu'tazila were mentioned, and he said, Ayyub as-Sakhtiyani, indeed these people are revolving around the issue of wanting to say that there is no deity, there is nothing above the heaven. There is nothing above the heaven. And likewise you have the statement, similarly, of there's loads of statements. Asim bin Ali, the Sheikh of Imam al-Bukhari, Jarir ad-Dabbi, he said, قال يحيى بن المغيرة سمعت جرير بن عبد الحميد يقول كلام الجهمية أوله عسل وآخره سم وإنما يحاولون أن يقولوا ليس في السماء إله. So he said, this Imam from the Salaf, he died at the 188 Hijrah, and he's from the Muhaddithin of the location Ar-Ray. So he said, the statement of the Jahmiyyah at the beginning, it is honey. At the beginning it is like honey. And at the end of it, it is poison. Indeed, they are trying to say that there is no deity above the heaven. Right? So our Salaf knew and understood this. Right? When he says, the speech of the Jahmiyyah, its beginning is like honey. And this is why when you hear the speech of the Ash'aris and Maturidis, right, when you listen to it, it sounds like honey. It sounds like honey. You know, we are declaring Allah free of imperfections. He's not like the bodies. He's not confined. He's not limited. He's not this, he's not that, whatever. All sounds like honey. Right? This is similar to the Khawarij when they speak about politics. Right? They speak with emotion, rhetoric, fiery zeal, and they convince you about that they're trying to argue for justice and so on, and they draw you into their web, right? Very emotional, right? Likewise here with the Jahmiyyah and the Mu'tazila and the way they claim that we're trying to declare free Allah of imperfections, and then they come out with all this stuff. Sounds like honey. What's at the end of it? It is poison, because what it really means when you peel all the layers is that they are saying there is no deity above the heaven, and Allah will not be seen in the hereafter, and Allah does not, and this Quran, this Arabic Quran that we hear and we recite and we memorize, this is not the speech of Allah, it's something created. Right? These are the things which are necessitated by their theology, by the foundations they are using to speak about Allah. So the Salaf already knew and they understood this in the 2nd century after Hijrah. They knew exactly what these people were intending to say and what intending to say. So these were the basic ideas then the Jahmiyyah came up with. There is no Lord above the heaven. Allah does not have speech, therefore the Quran is created. Allah will not be seen in the hereafter with the vision of the eyes, because why? Because otherwise it would mean he's a body, occupying space and all this nonsense. Right? So this is now what they put into motion. Alright. Remember we said, either you are here with the prophets and messengers, or you are over there. Do you understand? Right? Because they use the baggage of the philosophers. Look at the conclusions. What are the conclusions they're coming to? They're identical to the philosophers, aren't they? Yeah? Because you're using the baggage. Then you're going to be led to the same conclusions as them. Right? That Allah is just really something in the mind that you can think of. Right? He's got no attributes. And so you start undermining the actual existence of Allah Azza wa Jal. Why? Because you're saying He has no names, has no attributes, has no actions. And anything which has no attributes, it doesn't have any existence. Right? There's nothing can exist unless it has at least one attribute. Yes? As Ibn Taymiyyah mentions. Right? That nothing can exist unless it has an attribute. You can't think of anything in your mind which doesn't have an attribute. Right? And so that's why this really, the deen of the Jahmiyyah is something that leads towards atheism. It leads you towards believing in nothingness. Right? Because something without names, attributes, is something that really doesn't exist. But that's what the Jahmiyyah, this is where, the direction that they were going in, because of the baggage that they took from whom? From the philosophers. Right? Is that clear? So now we have the Jahmiyyah have now appeared in the Ummah, in the Muslim nation. And this statement in Al-Asma'i wa Sifat was taken from them by the Mu'tazila. So Amr bin Ubaid and those people who are with him, they then acquired this doctrine from the Jahmiyyah. And the difference between the Jahmiyyah and the Mu'tazila is that the Jahmiyyah were just really, they didn't write any books, they didn't establish a school of doctrine, they didn't have circles like this. They were just people walking around saying the speech, and the Salaf abused them and reviled them and attacked them and refuted them, right? The Mu'tazila, now they took the basic ideas, they began to write this down now. They began to elaborate upon this whole thing. And they began to refine the proofs and the evidences and write about these things about, ajsam and a'rad and, bodies, accidents and things like that, and write down books. And they developed this and took it to another level. Right? So what these Mu'tazila did is they thought, right, okay, how can we fight against the Salaf? How can we fight them? How can we establish our belief? So they began to invent principles by which they could promote these ideas. From those principles they invented they said, well, we distinguish between mutawatir and ahad. We only accept the mutawatir. And ahad, this is just speculative, it's not really knowledge. Why were they saying this? Because they detested the fact that the Salaf were narrating the ahadith to do with what? To do with an-nuzul, Allah's descent to the lowest heaven, and the various the hadith to do with the sifat, the attributes of Allah Azza wa Jal. They detested this. So they thought, how can we fight against this now? Right? Obviously they are juhal when it comes to ilm al-hadith, to the athar. So they began to invent principles. Mutawatir, ahad. Right? Anything which is mutawatir will accept it, ahad or will reject it because it's only speculative. Right? This is one false principle they brought into the ummah. Right? And the scholars refuted this, Imam Ahmad and other than them. Another principle they brought is that they brought this idea of haqiqah and majaz. Right? There is what is the reality in language, and there is the metaphorical language, what is just like metaphorical, it's not really meant or intended. This has never been spoken by any sahabi, by any tabi'i, by any of the imams, nor by any of the imams of the madahib in fiqh, nor by any of the Imams in the Arabic language. Not Al-Khalil, not Sibawayh, none of them. This thing is unheard of from the likes of them. This was invented by the Mu'tazila, and then it was taken by the Ash'aris and Maturidis as a means of attacking those verses and those ahadith which didn't agree with their foundations, the foundations that they were upon, which they took from the philosophers. So they could say, yes, this verse actually it's metaphorical. Al-Istiwa metaphorical. Hand metaphorical. Hand means qudra or ni'mah. Do you understand? This is another device now that they brought in order to fight against this. Likewise, they invented ta'wil as a mechanism to attack those texts which they didn't like, which clashed with their theology. So this is why in this time period, at the end of the 2nd century, the Mu'tazila, they grew strong. And some of them, they began to take all the verses of the Quran to do the attributes and inventing ta'wils for them. And one of the men who did this, his name is Bishr al-Marisi al-Hanafi al-Jahmi. This man was a Hanafi, he was a Jahmi, and he was known as Bishr al-Marisi. And he's the one who brought together all these ta'wils of the book in the book of Allah, and these are the ta'wils that the Ash'aris and Maturidis are relying upon. Right? The later ones who came afterwards. All of them come back to this man, Bishr al-Marisi al-Hanafi al-Jahmi. And the Imams of the Salaf, they wrote a book, like Imam al-Darimi, rahimahullah, wrote a book, Naqd Uthman bin Sa'id ala Bishr al-Marisi al-Jahmi al-Anid. Fantastic title and an excellent book. And so, in this time period then, we have the ta'wils now. So what do we see now? In the time of the Jahmiyyah, it was just speech. Now in the time of the Mu'tazila, now it starts becoming like a proper school of doctrine. Right? Principles are being outlined. Mutawatir, ahad, majaz, haqiqah. Ta'wils are being invented now to start addressing those texts of the Quran which they believe is tajzeeb and tashbih and kufr. Because this is really what they are saying. They are saying that Allah Azza wa Jal revealed to the Messenger of Allah, and what he conveyed to the people is something which, if we leave it as it is, it's tajzeeb and kufr and tashbih. So we have to make ta'wil of these verses so that the people are misguided. Can you see the evil they've come to now? It's as if the Quran now is something that will misguide people and direct them to kufr and tajzeeb and tashbih. This is the twisted minds that these people developed. Why? Because they took the baggage from over here. And they didn't suffice with what the prophets and messengers came with. Right? That's why they fell into this tremendous mistake. So now this school is developing and it's becoming an actual school of doctrine. Something that books are written for. Something for which schools are established. So these people, they gained strength. Then also the books of the Greeks were translated in this time period. Right? And then from those books of the Greeks, they gained more intellectual power. Right? And they would develop their doctrine even further. And this now we're coming now to the beginning of the 2nd century, and where this great mihna, the great trial took place. When the leaders, the caliphs of the time, because they'd become influenced and convinced by the Mu'tazila, they basically said that anyone who says the Quran is the speech of Allah is a kafir and a mushrik. Why? Because if he says Allah has speech, he's made Allah to be like a body. So he's a mushrik. And so they put all of the scholars of Islam, the scholars of the Sunnah, to trial. They brought them in chains from the various parts of the Muslim nation and put them to trial. They said, what do you say about the Quran? And anyone who said it is the speech of Allah uncreated, they chopped off his neck. And so many scholars were slaughtered like this. Many scholars, actually out of fear, they actually, to save their lives, they actually said, yes, the Quran is created. Although they didn't believe it. So they expressed something which is disbelief, but the hearts didn't believe it to save their lives, right? And so this is a tremendous trial that took place in that period of Islam because of this deen of the Jahmiyyah. And then, as we know, Imam Ahmad, rahimahullah ta'ala, he's the one who, for a good 7, 8, 9, 10 year period, he was brought in chains, in prison, beaten, arguing, debating. Then all these people, the heads of the Jahmiyyah, they came from all different places and they would argue against him in front of the caliph, and he would refute them and demolish them and annihilate them and so on and so forth. And eventually, after many, many years, Allah Azza wa Jal, He aided the Sunnah and He gave victory to the people of the Sunnah, because the Imam Ahmad, the caliph, eventually saw that he is upon the truth. He convinced the caliph, and then after that time, eventually the fitna of the Mu'tazila was subdued and it was finished. Right? So at this point, don't listen to the nonsense of the Ash'aris and Maturidis. Yes, we refuted the Mu'tazila. Ya Ikhwan, this is kadhib. Right? The Mu'tazila were demolished and annihilated by Imam Ahmad rahimahullah ta'ala. And after that time, the Ummah as a whole began to despise the Mu'tazila. They began to hate the Mu'tazila. The Mu'tazila were in decline because of Imam Ahmad. This is, 60 years, 70, 80 years before even Al-Ash'ari became known and began to, before he left the Mu'tazila. Right? So this is propaganda from the Ash'aris, that we argued against the Mu'tazila. No, he didn't. Imam Ahmad destroyed the Mu'tazila whilst he was in chains, and Allah gave victory to Imam Ahmad and the people of the Sunnah by way of Imam Ahmad. So now the matter would have been finished at this point. Are you okay to continue? Sorry, I've lost track of time. It's 10 o'clock. Are you okay to continue or what? Yes or no? Okay. Afwan. I got carried away in the flow of the things. So now the matter would have been finished, right? Victory to the people of the Sunnah, right? Victory to those who aided the prophets and messengers, who is Imam Ahmad. The matter would have been dead and finished. But then what happened? Something else. Allah's qada wal qadar. What happened now is now another group of people who come along, and they basically also people who are into argumentation. So they now decide, we're going to argue with the Mu'tazila. We're going to argue with them. Right? This is a group of people who are present in the time of Imam Ahmad. Right? They are Ibn Kullab, Al-Harith Al-Muhasibi, and before that, Hussein Al-Karabisi. Right? These are names of people who had some knowledge. But they began to argue with the Mu'tazila. And because these people were not grounded in knowledge, they weren't grounded in the Sunnah, they made some mistakes. They were unable to answer some of the doubts of the Mu'tazila. They couldn't argue the doubts of the Mu'tazila. Right? So the issue that was under discussion was to do with the Quran, and was to do with, the Mu'tazila basically said, and this is something that's discussed by Imam As-Sijizi rahimahullah in one of his books, and he discusses what happened. So I'm going to summarize it really in very, very quickly for shortage of time. Basically, well, before we move on to this, let's just make things clear. What do the philosophers say? They say that the Creator is just something that you just think of oneness in the mind. Think of the idea of oneness. No names, no attributes, no nothing. It's just like an idea in the mind. Yes? Is that clear? That's what they're saying basically, right? The Jahmiyyah, what they are saying Allah has no names, no attributes. We can't describe Him with anything, because if we do, we made Him like the creation. Basically, it's the same as what the philosophers are saying, yeah? Is that clear? What did the Mu'tazila do? The Mu'tazila, they came along, they said, well actually, Allah has names, but we can't accept any attributes. Right? But really this is a trick on their behalf, because when they say Allah has names, this was really only a way to protect themselves, because in the Quran clearly we can see that Allah has said that He's Ar-Rahman, Ar-Rahim, Al-Malik, Al-Qudus, As-Salam, and so on and so forth. So to protect themselves from the people of the Sunnah, they said, yes, we believe in the names. But really they didn't. They said, yes, we believe Allah is Ar-Rahim, but not with mercy. Does that make sense? Can you say someone, yes, this man is generous, and yet he's not generous as a quality? Does that make sense? Does it make sense to say Allah is Ar-Rahim, yet He has no attribute of mercy? Can you say Allah is Al-Alim, but not without ilm? Does that make sense? No. This was the trick that the Mu'tazila were playing in order to protect themselves. And this is what you'll find with the people of Kalam all the time. Ash'aris, Maturidis, they're always playing these word games to protect themselves, right? So Jahmiyyah, we don't accept anything. Mu'tazila, we accept the names, but really they don't. And we don't accept any attributes. Because if you say Allah has attributes, basically now you've made him to be in parts. Allah is composed. Because Allah's knowledge is one part, Allah's mercy is another part, Allah's wisdom is another part, right? And basically you're saying Allah is made of parts. Allah is murakkab. This is tarkeeb, composition. All this is philosophical baggage from the philosophers. This is what they were saying, right? So they denied all the attributes. So Ibn Kullab, Al-Harith al-Muhasibi, and people like that, they came along and they were debating with the Mu'tazila. And there was a specific argument that they couldn't refute. Why? Because they weren't grounded in the Sunnah. And this argument basically was they said, look at this Quran. In this Quran we see that there are verses, and these verses are in order. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim, Maliki Yawmiddin. And if you say that this is Allah's speech, then there's the alif, and then the lam comes afterwards, and then the ha comes afterwards, then the mim comes afterwards, and the dal comes afterwards. Doesn't this mean like succession? Doesn't this mean like a sequence? And doesn't it mean that Allah is then somehow, He's subject to events because things are in all this nonsense, stupidity, foolishness. But Ibn Kullab and these people, they couldn't answer this doubt. They couldn't answer this shubha. So then they thought, how on earth can we answer this thing if Allah is like confined by time and the sequence and things like that? So what they did was, what Ibn Kullab did, he said, okay, tell you what we'll do. We'll accept all of those attributes in which are permanent with Allah, right? So for example, Allah's hearing, is it permanent or temporary? Is it permanent or temporary? Allah's seeing, does Allah see all the time? Yes. Allah's wisdom, is He always wise? Yeah. So they said those attributes, we'll accept them, no problem. Right? But anything in which Allah's will and choice is involved, we can't accept that. Right? So for example, Allah chooses to speak. Yes, when He wills. That's correct, isn't it? If Allah wills, He will create if He wants to. Yes? Right? So in other words, there are attributes which are tied to Allah's will. Right? They're not permanent attributes. Allah's anger. Allah becomes angry on account of actions of His servants. Allah becomes pleased on account of actions of His servants. But is Allah always angry? Is anger a permanent attribute? No. Right? So these types of attributes they had a problem with. Ibn Kullab. They couldn't accept these attributes. But as for all the other attributes, yes, Allah is above the throne. Yes, Allah has the attribute of face, hand, eyes. And they were refuting the Mu'tazila on these issues. They have books. Ibn Kullab has a book where he's refuting the Jahmiyyah and the Mu'tazila on these issues. Right? So he accepted Allah is above the throne, accepted Allah's names, accepted most of Allah's attributes. Was just this one issue of where anything which is connected to Allah's will, which He chooses to do, and which is not something which is permanent, it's not a permanent attribute, then said we can't accept those things. Right? And for that reason, he was stuck on the issue of the Quran. He was stuck on the issue of the Quran. So therefore, he invented something new which no one said before him. He said, the Quran therefore is only kalam nafsi. The Quran, this Quran is the Arabic Quran. This is not Allah's speech. This is only an expression of Allah's speech. But the speech which is with Allah, it is kalam nafsi. It is just something that exists with Allah in His, within His self. Anyway, he invented this new saying. Now, from this new saying was the idea that there are two Qur'ans. There's the Qur'an which is with Allah, which is eternal, right? And there is this Qur'an that we have with us, which is the Arabic Qur'an, which consists of letters and words and so on and so forth. And this is what we have, the Arabic Qur'an that we read. This is actually something which is created. Right? This statement was never there before. It was never there before. Before, when the Salaf were refuting the Mu'tazila, this statement never existed. It was innovated by Ibn Kullab, Why? Because he was just arguing an argumentation which is not from the way of the Salaf. And he wasn't grounded in knowledge like the great scholars. And so he fell prey to their doubts. And therefore he invented this saying. Right? So this now is the way of the kullabiyah. The kullabiyah, they accepted all of the names, all of the attributes, most of the attributes. But these specific types of attributes which are connected to Allah's will, Allah's choice, Allah's mashi'ah, they deny those attributes and then they try to give explanations for them. So this now is Ibn Kullab. Yeah.
Sorry, so he's the one who started the ta'bir.
Yeah. Ibara is an ibara. That's right. Yeah. Okay, so now this now is Ibn Kullab, and there's a group known as the Kullabiyah. Right? Kullabiyah, they're present now in some of the lands. In Basra. Likewise, some of the Kullabiyah were over towards Samarkand. Samarkand and that place, this is where Al-Maturidi, where he was. Right? This is where he was. There were Kullabiyah in that direction. There were Mu'tazila and there were Kullabiyah in that direction. Right? This is now where we come to where the Maturidis and the Ash'aris, where they come from. Right? So let's discuss these two. So, Abu Hasan al-Ash'ari, he, in his early age, his father passed away and his mother married one of the heads of the Mu'tazila. So he was brought up as a Mu'tazili most of his life. He was upon the way of the Mu'tazila. So whereas Imam Ahmad had demolished the Mu'tazila already, around that time, al-Ash'ari wasn't even born. This shows the propaganda of these people is baseless. In any case, Abu Hasan al-Ash'ari was upon the way of the Mu'tazila for most of his life, and then when he was in Basra and those places, he sat in the circles of the Kullabiyah. The Kullabiyah was still present, even though Imam Ahmad spoke against them, they were still present. So he sat and he listened to their speech, and basically he accepted their speech, and he made tawbah from i'tizal. And he came out and he announced his repentance from that particular way. So then he was upon the way of Ibn Kullab for a good 10, however many years. And then over time, as he came into contact with the madhab of Imam Ahmad, he slowly began to change and become closer and closer and closer to the the madhab of Imam Ahmad. So basically the scholars, they say that the three periods of Abu Hasan al-Ash'ari, first he was a Mu'tazili, then he accepted the ideas of the Kullabiyah, and from there he gradually moved closer and closer to the way of Imam Ahmad until he was mostly there in almost everything. Right? This is what is most correct, because the scholars do differ about whether there's 3 stages or 2 stages. But that which is most correct is this view. And his books, he wrote many books, and when we analyze the books, they are a testimony to this fact. So now al-Ash'ari, he was upon, the belief that he was upon was basically that Allah, he accepted the ulu of Allah, Allah is above the throne, he accepted that Allah has the sifat khabariyah, that he has the attribute of hand and face and eyes, and we accepted most of the affairs that the people of the Sunnah accepted. Right? So this is Ash'ari on this side. On the other side, near Samarkand and those places where there were Mu'tazila and the Kullabiyah, Al-Maturidi, he came at the end of the 3rd century, beginning of the 4th century, and he was involved in debates with the Mu'tazila. And likewise, there were Kullabiyah present as well. And these influences led him to develop his school of thought. And that school of thought, it is upon the same foundations of the Mu'tazila. If you read the book of the book that he wrote, Al-Maturidi, you'll see similar ideas. What is the first obligation? Right? And the first obligation, what do the people of the Sunnah say? What is the first obligation? Shahada, and to worship Allah. What do they say? The first obligation is you have to now start using your reason to prove Allah exists. Is this correct? It's not correct, is it? This is what they made the first obligation. Right? Remember those 2 questions we said. What is the first obligation? And how, through what route do we come to know Allah? Right? First obligation is to make the shahadatan, yes? And then to worship Allah by acquiring knowledge by way of revelation. What did they say? The Ahlul Kalam. They said, the first obligation is now, you have to start looking around and developing a rational proof to prove to yourself Allah exists. Yeah? And then they said, the way you do this is not by way of revelation, it's by way of reason. Reason is what tells you about belief in Allah and what He can be described with and what He cannot be described with. Do you understand? Right? This is the foundation of what Ilmul Kalam is founded upon. So this is the foundation of what Al-Maturidi was upon, and he took that from the Mu'tazila, who took that from the Jahmiyyah, who took it from the Falasifa. Right? This is the usul of the Maturidi madhab. Right? And in this, they departed from what Abu Hanifa was upon, and what Abu Yusuf was upon, and the students of Abu Hanifa, because they were upon the madhab of the Salaf. They never knew any of this ilmul kalam, right? But these Hanafis who came later, they developed this doctrine, and then because they ascribed to Abu Hanifa in fiqh, then they tried to throw it upon Abu Hanifa. They began to write works which are not really by Abu Hanifa. And they began to put all this philosophical language, al-ajsam, wal-a'rad, wal this and that, whatever, is nothing to do with Abu Hanifa. And then they tried to throw it upon Abu Hanifa, right? This is the Maturidis. So, Al-Maturidi, he basically developed ideas which were very similar to the Mu'tazila. And because Al-Ash'ari on the other side, he also came from the Mu'tazila, those people who followed him like Al-Baqilani, Abu Mansur Al-Baghdadi, Abu Al-Mu'ali Al-Juwayni, Al-Razi, Al-Ghazali, and all those who came, the Ash'aris who came after, then they ascribed to Al-Ash'ari, but they were really following the Mu'tazila and the Jahmiyyah. Right? They followed them. So, so basically now we have these two groups, the Ash'aris and the Maturidis. They are carrying the ideas that came from the Mu'tazila and the Jahmiyyah. They are the inheritors of that belief. And it came to them by way of, first of all, they were from the Mu'tazila, in the case of Al-Ash'ari, or they were debating with the Mu'tazila and interacting with the Kullabiyah, right? And they took those basic ideas and then they developed their school of thought, right? So what you see from the Ash'aris and the Maturidis is what they're really doing is they are playing word games. Remember we said that the Mu'tazila, they said that we accept the names of Allah, but really they don't. Do you understand? They said, yes, we accept Allah is Ar-Rahim, but He doesn't have mercy. This is nonsensical, right? This is just word games that you are using to protect yourself and shield yourself. This is the same thing that the Ash'aris and Maturidis say and do, right? You say to them, Allah is above the throne. They say, yes, we believe Allah is above the throne. But what you mean is different to what they mean. What the Salaf mean is what they mean. What they mean is just like, for example, a gold coin is above a silver coin in value. Yes? This is what they mean. They say, yes, we believe Allah is above the throne. We don't deny that. Allah is above the throne. Some of them say this. They say, yes, Allah is above the throne. But what they really mean is, yes, just like a gold coin is worth more than a silver coin in value and status, this is what they actually really mean. Right? And some of them will be more clear. They will say, actually, you can't say Allah is above, because being above is a quality of bodies, because being above means a place, and a place means a location. Location means that you're occupying space, and occupying space means you're a body. Right? That's what they really are saying. And all of this is from Aristotle. Right? It's the poison of Aristotle coming from them. So these people are intoxicated. Like a person is drunk. And when he's speaking drunkenly, you can see that he's drunk. Right? Intoxication can be with chemicals. It can be with liquids, where your mind is gone. It can also be with terms, terminology and baggage. Right? Your mind is poisoned with like these terms. Ajsam, a'rad, hawadith, whatever else, right? And then when you start speaking, it's intoxication, right? There's a type of intoxication. I'm going to read to you a statement of Imam Ibn Surayj al-Shafi'i, rahimahullah ta'ala, if I can find where it is. Here we are. Ibn Surayj al-Shafi'i in the year 306 Hijrah. Listen to these amazing words. It's quoted by Abu Ismail al-Harawi in Dhammul Kalam, likewise by Ibn Taymiyyah in Bayan Talbis al-Jahmiyyah. Now we are contrasting between the Tawheed of the messengers and the Tawheed of who? And those who followed their way, right? So we have the philosophers and we have the Ahlul Kalam who are basically in that direction. Yes? Is that clear to you? He says, and you want to write this down, توحيد أهل العلم وجماعة المسلمين أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وأن محمدا رسول الله. Is that clear? The Tawheed of the people of knowledge and the Jama'ah of the Muslims is what? What is our Tawheed? It is to say there is none which has the right to be worshipped except Allah, and that Muhammad is the messenger of Allah. This is the Tawheed that we know. Is there any other Tawheed that the Muslims know besides this? Is there any other Tawheed? No, this is the Tawheed. Tawheed Ahlil Ilmi wa Jama'atil Muslimin ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa anna Muhammadan Rasulullah. Wa Tawheed Ahlil Batil وتوحيد أهل الباطل الخوض في الأعراض والأجسام وإنما بعث النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم بإنكار ذلك. The Tawheed of the people of Batil is to start disputing and delving into what is a body, what is an accident, what is a jism, what is an arad, what is this. Meaning all of this philosophical nonsense that came from Plato, Aristotle, Philo, Judaeus, Clement of Alexandria, Augustine, Hippo, John of Damascus, Jahm bin Safwan, Ja'd bin Dirham, Mu'tazila, Jahmiyyah, Ash'aris, Maturid, all this nonsense. That is their Tawheed. It is not the Tawheed of the people of knowledge and the Jama'ah of the Muslimin. وَإِنَّمَا بُعِثَ النَّبِيُّ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وَسَلَّمْ بِإِنْكَارِ ذَلِكَ. The messenger was sent to actually reject all that and to denounce all of that. This is connected to the verse سُبْحَانَ رَبِّكَ رَبِّ الْعِزَّةِ عَمَّا يَصِفُونَ. Allah Azza wa Jal rejects everything which is used to describe him which came before. All that nonsense. And only what the messengers came with is acceptable in describing Allah Azza wa Jal. So you can see here now that the Salaf were very, very clear that they knew this way was batil, was falsehood, right? And this is the ilmul kalam that the Salaf condemned. You must have heard many narrations from the Salaf condemning the people of kalam, the people of ilmul kalam. I'll find you some statements from them. This is what they were speaking about when they used to make these statements, when they condemned ilmul kalam. So for example, Imam al-Shafi'i rahimahullah ta'ala, he said, my ruling regarding the people of kalam is that they are to be beaten with palm branches. This is Imam al-Shafi'i speaking about the people who were involved in this type of falsafa and kalam. And this includes the Ash'aris and Maturidis. This hukm here of Imam al-Shafi'i is a hukm upon the Ash'aris and the Maturidis, because they weren't present in his time. If they were present in his time, or in the time of Imam Ahmad, then they would have had something else coming to them. Right? Because we know how Imam Ahmad dealt with Ibn Kullab, and how the likes of Hussein al-Karabisi, how they were dealt with. They were reviled and scorned for what they did. Why? Because the Mu'tazila were finished. They were dead. They were dead. There wouldn't have been no Ash'aris or Maturidis after that if it hadn't been for the likes of Ibn Kullab and those kind of people. Right? So this is the ruling of Imam al-Shafi'i rahimahullah ta'ala. My ruling regarding the people of Kalam is that they are beaten with palm branches and shoes. Then they are to be carried upon camels and paraded amongst the kinsfolk, whilst it is being announced about them. This is the reward of the one who abandoned the book and the Sunnah and turned to Kalam. Right? This is one statement from Imam al-Shafi'i. He also said, my ruling upon the people of Kalam is the ruling of Umar upon Sabir. Sabir was an individual in the time of Umar bin al-Khattab who would go to the Muslims and start asking about certain verses. What does this verse mean? What does that verse mean? What does this verse mean? What does that verse mean? Right? So Umar summoned him, brought him, took some palm branches, beat him on the head so hard that Sabir said, wait a minute, stop. Part of my head's gone. Right? And then, he basically exiled him and whatever else because he was asking questions he shouldn't be about the book of Allah Azza wa Jal. So Ash-Shafi'i said, 100 and how many years afterwards, my ruling upon these people of Kalam is the ruling of Umar upon Sabir. Likewise, so many statements so many, but you know that Imam Ahmad, Imam Malik, Imam Shafi'i, Abu Hanifa, all of them, they basically condemned this type of indulgence in Kalam. So, where have we got to? We basically discussed the Jahmiyyah and the Mu'tazila in the 2nd century. We then moved to Ibn Kullab in the 3rd century, who is now a bridge. He's a bridge between the Mu'tazila and the Ash'aris and the Maturidis. Right? And the Ash'aris and the Maturidis, they drew from the Mu'tazila and from the Kullabiyah, and this is how their school developed. Right? Now, if you look at the base of the doctrines of the Maturidiyyah and the Ash'aris, you will see that really they are identical to the doctrines of the Mu'tazila and Jahmiyyah, except that they play with words in order to hide what they really believe. That's the secret. Right? So their belief really is that the Quran is created. But then they'll have loads of words and techniques and methods they'll use to actually hide that fact. Right? Likewise with Allah's ulu, that He's above the 7 heavens. They'll play word games. We say, oh yes, we believe that Allah is above. What they really mean is that He's above in status, in rank and status, not in actual that Allah Himself is above the heavens. Right? And then they'll do the same with numerous other attributes as well. So this kind of, although it's not a good comprehensive treatment, there's a lot more detail that could have been given, but I think you got the general idea, right? The general idea, there's only this way here, prophets and messengers, or there's that way over there. Either you use wahi and naql as the foundation, or if you're going to use aql, what's going to happen? You're going to be forced in that direction to reject everything. That's what's going to happen. And that's why if you look at all of these groups, which one of these groups, I'm going to test your understanding now, which one of these groups is the most consistent? Huh? Jahmiyyah. Why? Why they're the most consistent? Huh? Because they outright negated everything. And this is a coherent position. This makes sense. It makes sense, doesn't it? Because if you're saying, hang on, the Creator, we can't describe Him with any names and attributes, otherwise we will turn Him into a body like the bodies. Right? Because what they're saying is, look, there's no thing in existence except that if we look at it, this bottle has length, has width, it has texture, whatever else. And, these attributes, you can't have attributes on their own. This is what they're saying. Can you imagine length existing by itself? You can't, can it? Right? This is an attribute. Attributes must have what? Something to exist in. This is right, isn't it? Yeah. Is this true or not? Yeah. Attributes can't exist on their own. It has to be in something, doesn't it? Right? And so, what they are saying is, if Allah had attributes, it means He would have a body. Do you get it? This is the falsafa again. Right? If Allah has attributes, it must mean He is a body. Or, So what they said was that Allah cannot be described with anything at all. Right? And this is a consistent position, isn't it? It's coherent, isn't it? It makes sense, doesn't it? If you accept that premise, it makes sense, doesn't it? Right? And so they went to such a level that they said, do not describe Allah with... Because you can describe something in positives and you can describe something in negatives. Right? So if I said... So this is what it led them to, that they were so scared of us describing Allah with any attribute that they said will only describe him with negatives. Do you understand? So you say, okay, Allah is not blind. Do you understand? Do you understand? So basically you're avoiding giving Allah an attribute so you don't make him like a body. So you're not saying Allah is seeing. Because if you said Allah is seeing an attribute, it means that to have the attribute of seeing, there must be a body and there must be a whatever else. So we say Allah is not ignorant. Yeah? Allah is not deaf. Allah does not sleep. Right? Negatives. Do you understand this? This is what's called negative theology. Right? This is what the Greeks were upon. This is what Plotinus was upon. This is what came to the ahlul kalam. This is how they speak about Allah. Right? So if you are consistent in this basic idea you took from the Greeks, then the most consistent position is to say we don't describe Allah with anything at all. No names, no attributes, no actions, no nothing. But this now is pure atheism, is it not? Is this not atheism? That's why the Salaf, they recognize this, and Imam Ahmad recognized this. They said that Jahm is saying that Allah is no thing. Because nothing can exist except that it must have an attribute. You can't think of anything in your mind which doesn't have an attribute. It's non-existent. Right? So really what the Jahmiyyah is, that's why, remember those statements we read from Hamad bin Zayd and Ayyub al-Sakhtiyani, what they were saying? That these Jahmiyyah are trying to say there's nothing above the heaven. Meaning that there's no deity. Because this is what this position really necessitates. That Allah is nothing. Right? So, on this side, you're either consistent and you accept the Quran and the Sunnah and you say all those principles that Abu Iyaad spoke of in his lecture. We describe Allah with whatever He described Himself with, whatever His messenger described Him with, without asking how, without likening, without this, without that. This is a uniform principle, is it not? This is a uniform, coherent principle that we apply to everything which Allah described Himself with. Whether it is His names, His attributes, His actions. And there's no problem for us in that. Because there's no لَيْسَ كَمِثْلِهِ شَيْءٍ وَهُوَ السَّمِيعُ الْبَصِيرُ. There is nothing in what Allah described Himself which necessitates resemblance. There's nothing. So Allah has knowledge, unlike our knowledge. Allah has hearing, unlike our hearing. Allah has seeing, unlike our seeing. Allah has life, unlike our life. Allah has hands, unlike our hands. And we apply this to every single thing uniformly. There's no incoherence, there's no inconsistency, there's no contradiction. This is wadih to everybody. This is clear, isn't it? Is it not? Clear. But if you now are upon this, the only position is you have to take the same position as the philosophers and say that Allah or the creator or the first cause or whatever they call Him is only an existence in the mind. He only exists in your mind, because only in the mind can you think of an entity which doesn't have an attribute. Do you understand? There are some things which exist only in your mind. Like if I said to you, if I made something up, some creature, for example, an elephant which flies and, which can make a cup of tea or something, whatever else, and I made something up, totally fallacious, and I fabricated it. This exists only in my mind. It does not exist in external reality. True? True? Yes. So similarly, there are some things which you think of, but they can only exist in your mind, not in external reality. So the idea of a creator that the philosophers and the Jahmiyyah, that they came to on account of this philosophical babble and nonsense, is that His existence is an existence that you can think of only in the mind, not in external reality. Right? So really there are only two positions. There are only two positions. Either it is this over here, or it is that over there. Right? Now these people in the middle, who are the people of Kalam, right? So remember we said the Jahmiyyah are basically, they're consistent. They're over there and they're saying we don't accept any names, attributes. In the middle you've got the Mu'tazila, Kullabiyya, Ash'ariyya, Maturidiyyah. All of these are full of contradiction, incoherence. Right? So what will happen is, and this is really what you will see when you study all of their theology, you will see, for example, the Maturidi will come along. Let's start with the Jahmiyyah. We know already that the Mu'tazila, they really believe the belief of the Jahmiyyah, but they were scared from the Muslim scholars, so they just began to claim, oh yes, we believe in the names. We believe in the names. But if you believe in the names, you have to believe in the attributes, because how can you have someone who is Al-Alim, who has no ilm? Ar-Rahim, who has no rahmah. This is impossible, right? So now they're playing word games and they're being inconsistent. This is a contradiction. This is why they were scorned and rejected and refuted by the Salaf, right? So this is a clear contradiction, is it not? How can you say, yes, I accept Allah is Ar-Rahman, Ar-Rahim, but you know what? It doesn't have the attribute of mercy, because if he had an attribute, it means his body would be composed. He would be composed. This is contradiction, nonsense. So then you have the Ash'aris and the Maturidis, and then they will turn to the Mu'tazila, and the Mu'tazila will say, look, you know, you say Allah has mercy. You say Allah has knowledge and hearing, because even the mercy, the Ash'aris and Maturidis don't accept, basically in general they don't accept the attribute of mercy or wisdom or things like that. But the attributes they do affirm, let's stick with them. The Mu'tazila say, you say Allah has ilm, you say Allah has power, you say Allah has hearing and seeing, right? So then the Maturidis and Ash'aris will say, hold on, wait a minute. Just because there is agreement in the name does not mean that the realities are the same. Do you understand that, yeah? So if we say that Allah has ilm and we have ilm, just because the word ilm is the same doesn't mean that the realities behind them are the same, right? Like my ilm is not the same, you know, our ilm is not the same as Allah's ilm. This is clear, isn't it? So the Maturidis, this is the actual argument that al-Maturidi uses in his book to refute the Mu'tazila, right? But then, when we use the same argument against them, which is identical, we say, hold on a minute, Allah's hand, the word hand, although it's the same in wording and meaning, the reality, the haqiqah behind it is different between Allah and between us. Then they don't accept this. This now is a contradiction in the argument, right? And I'll explain to you why this is. Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah gives two beautiful examples in At-Tadmuriyah. He says, look, when he's refuting these people, let's take the soul, for example, the soul. Does anybody know the reality of the soul? Now, does anybody know? What's it made of? What's its essence made of? Does anybody know? Can anybody know? Anybody seen a soul? Okay. Can a soul hear? Can a soul hear? Yes, it can. Can a soul hear? Does a soul arise? Does a soul come down? Right. So, how does the soul hear? How does it hear? Okay. But hearing, we hear as humans in this form, and there's hearing, right? Are they the same? Just because the name is the same, is the reality the same? Yes or no? It's not, is it? Right? So look at this. This is an example within the creation. There are two created things where we can understand the meaning. We understand what it means to hear, because to hear is different to see. And to see is different to know. Right? These are clear different meanings in our minds. Right? We can distinguish them in our minds, right? Right? So, if it is possible for two created things in Allah's creation, where for one of them we know the meaning and the reality, right? So you know that the meaning and the reality here, I can see, I can hear, But for the other one, we know only the meaning but not the reality. Do you understand? Right? So we know what it means if the soul can hear, the soul arises, but we don't know the reality of it, yeah? If that is possible for between two things in the creation, then it is even more so between the creation and between the creator. Do you understand? So for example, therefore it is even more so that the ilm which we have, we understand its meaning, and the ilm which Allah has, we understand its meaning, but the realities are totally different. Do you understand? So when we come along and we use that same argument against the Maturidi and the Ash'ari, which he uses against the Mu'tazili and the Jahmi, he won't accept it from us, even though he's using that same argument against the Jahmi and the Mu'tazili. Contradiction. Contradiction, right? Blatant contradiction. So the point being that all of these people, they have a complete contradiction, right? Either they should be over there, or they just go with the Jahmiyyah. That's why the Salaf said That's why they used to call them, the Salaf used to call these people, they are the makhanith. They are the makhanith of the Jahmiyyah. Makhanith means someone who's neither male or female. Either be a man, just be a full man and join the people of the Sunnah, or be effeminate and remain with the Jahmiyyah. Don't stick in the middle playing these games and using false argumentation, contradicting yourself and using word game. Either be over there or be over here. Don't be in the middle as the makhanith of the Jahmiyyah. This is what the Salaf actually said. The scholars of ahlus sunnah, they say this because this is their reality. They're neither here, they're neither there. And the reality is that if you are not with the prophets and messengers, then basically you will be pulled in that direction over here with the philosophers and the Jahmiyyah. Why? Because if you were to follow the full logical sequence, you are obligated to say the same thing as the Jahmiyyah. Right? The Ash'aris, to remain consistent, really, they have to follow through all of the arguments. It would take them to what the Jahmiyyah are upon. This is how you would be truthful and consistent. Right? But everything is basically, there's contradictions, there's holes, this is a whole subject and topic in itself, the contradictions within the theology of the Ash'aris and the Maturidis, especially the Ash'aris, right? Because there's some difference between the Maturidis and Ash'aris. In general, the Maturidis have better answers to certain things, and they have disputes between themselves, but this is a whole topic in and of itself. So, I think we'll finish. Let's just make sure first of all, is everybody clear now what is going on? Yeah. This is an issue to do with aql and naql. Aql and naql. Right? It's either revelation is what we use as the source of our knowledge, or it is aql which we use as the source of our knowledge. And the aql these people used was whose aql? It was the aql of Aristotle and Plato, right? And the Jews, Christians and Sabia who were basically poisoned by that. This is the aql that they are talking about, right? Also another proof, tell me, if aql was a sound basis, how come all of these people, they're differing with each other? Why is the Jahmi saying one thing? Why is the Mu'tazili saying another thing? Why is the Ash'ari saying another thing? And why is the Maturidi saying another thing? Why are you all differing then?
Everybody's aql are different.
Yeah. Why are you all different? Why are you fighting amongst each other? Because the Jahmi will say to the Mu'tazili, you are a mujassim, mushrik, kafir. Because you affirm names for Allah. And the Mu'tazili will say to the Ash'ari, you are mujassima, mushabbiha, because you make composition, you made Allah murakkab. You've affirmed multiple attributes, which means there's multiple deities and He's composed. You are mushrikun, mujassima, mushabbiha, you are kuffar. Right? And then, so the same thing, they're saying this to each other and they're fighting with each other. If aql was the definitive knowledge, because they say aql is qat'i, it's definitive in providing knowledge. If that was the case, why are you all arguing with each other then? Why are you all fighting and leading, calling each other to be astray? But as for the people of the Sunnah, tell me, from the people of the Sunnah, from the time of the Messenger of Allah Sallallahu, from the Khulafa and the Salaf, and then after them and so on and so forth, to this day of ours, tell me, if you were to pick up a statement of Imam Ibn Baz, rahimahullah, and you go back into every single century and every single major alim, you go work your way backwards. Shaykhul Islam Muhammad bin Abdul Wahhab, Shaykhul Islam, Ibn al-Qayyim, Ibn Taymiyyah, and going all the way back, and every single Imam, and you just look at what they say, in fact, and you look at their statements and what they say, would you find any difference? Would you find any difference? Alright, let me bring to you some statements. Their statement is one. Their statement is one, and because it is taken from the Kitab and the Sunnah. Imam ad-Darimi rahimahullah ta'ala, وَنَصِفُهُ بِمَا وَصَفَ بِهِ نَفْسَهُ وَوَصَفَهُ بِهِ الرُّسُولُ. We describe him with what he described himself and with what his messenger described him. This is Imam ad-Darimi, and he's saying this basically 500 years, 600 years before Shaykhul Islam ibn Taymiyyah. Right? Can anyone find fault with this principle? Can an Ash'ari come along and when we say to him, we describe Allah with what He described Himself and what His messenger described Him with, and we negate things from Allah, what Allah negated from Himself, and what his messenger negated from himself. Tell me which Ash'ari is going to refute that? Which Maturidi is going to refute? How can they say this is batil? Tell me, how can they say this is batil? Is this methodology batil?
No.
Right? So our speech, our principles, our foundations are taken from the Quran and from the Sunnah, and there is perfect agreement from the first right to the very end. Right? All of it is one thing, consistent in conformity with each other. But if you look at the people of the Kalam, amongst themselves, even the Maturidis, they have these disputes. Hang on, wait a minute. Do we follow tafweed? Or shall we stick to a bit of ta'weel? Or shall we take a bit of this and a bit of that? But where shall we apply it? What about in this case? Can we apply it here? Someone say yes, another say no. All disputing, they don't have a single united word about when is tafweed applicable and when is ta'weel applicable. Right? So they have these discussions amongst themselves. They're not united. How can this be the truth then? How can this be the truth? So the point being, ya ikhwan, what you need to understand then is that ilmul kalam came into the ummah, a poison, and this poison that they brought, it necessitated from them that they have an evil perception to the revealed texts. They have an evil perception to the Quran and to the Sunnah because they believe that the Quran and the Sunnah came with words and came with statements which, if just left like they are, the common people would become mushrikun, mujassimun, mushabbihun, right? Because of this baggage that they brought into Islam. Then, in order to resolve this issue, they began to invent all of these things. Al-mutawatir, al-ahad, right? Distinguish between these two. Al-majaz, al-haqiqah, between these two. Mutashabihat, right? Begin another one of their arguments, that the verses of the attributes are mutashabihat, right? They have an argument there as well. And likewise, ta'weel was just a mechanism by which they could address those verses which they believed contained kufr, if left as they are, right? So they have statements like that. And then there was a problem with ta'weel, because this is the problem that they realized. One person comes along and says the meaning of hand is qudra, and another person comes along and says no, actually the ta'weel is actually ni'mah, favor, right? So who's right? There's no way of telling who's right. Why? Because first of all, this is not the meaning of the ayah to begin with. You're trying to distort it. But then they realize, hang on, how come we're coming with different ta'weels for the same verse? So they realized, hang on, this is not really a sound method to deal with this problem of this tajseem and tashbih, which apparently is in the speech of Allah and the speech of His Messenger. Right? They realized this. Right? So then they came with another mechanism. They said, you know what? Let's just make tafweed. With tafweed, we solve the problem altogether. We say basically all of these texts, we don't know what the meanings are. No one can know the meanings. And basically you've washed everything clean. You've washed everything clean. Right? So tafweed is more like a heavy duty mechanism. It does the job. It gets rid of all of the kufr that they allege is in the Quran and in the Sunnah. Meaning all of the tajseem and the tashbih. Right? Which is what they, from their angle. From their angle, say in the Quran, Allah's ascribed to Himself a face and hands, and He's above the throne. All of this is tajseem. It means Allah is a body. This is their perception of the texts. So we have to sanitize these texts. We have to clean these texts. We have to neutralize these texts. So ta'weel as a mechanism was okay, but they realized, hang on, this can't be right, because someone's got to be wrong. Right? Either it's qudra or it's ni'mah. We're speculating. Who knows what's right? Well, we don't know because we're speculating. So this mechanism is not really a good solid mechanism. So then they came with tafweed. Let's just say all the texts, we don't know what they mean. They're just words and the meanings are unknown and no one can really know them. This way you've just cleaned everything in a single go. And that's why they differ amongst themselves as to which approach shall we take. Some of them say tafweed is the way to go. Others say, well, actually, no, it's ta'weel. Others say, no, we'll stick to tafweed as a general rule, but then we'll apply ta'wil in some instances. Right? All of this you find in the books of the Maturidis. They differ with each other. How can this be the truth? How can this be the haqq? It isn't. So, there's a lot more that can be said. Since it's getting late, and I know probably many people have travelled, I think we'll have to cut short at this stage. But this is a vast and mighty topic, and perhaps maybe on another occasion we can do something a bit more detailed, perhaps a seminar on this subject, go in a bit more detail, because really in this lesson I was unable to make extensive quotations. If I started going into the quotations from the Imams of the Salaf, and it would then become even longer. So what I tried to do was to try to give the basic structure, the general idea, the overview, the picture of the jigsaw puzzle, right? So that you have at least a basic understanding that when an Ash'ari comes along or a Maturidi comes along and starts speaking this language, you know exactly where he's coming from, right? Allah is not subject to events. Allah is not confined by space. Allah is not confined by time. Allah is not a body. Allah is not... You know where this is coming from. This is not from the prophets and messengers, right? This is from those people, right? So at least you know where they're coming from. Then it's just a matter of basically looking individually at the shubha or the argument or the doubt and dealing with it appropriately. So as I said, this requires maybe a proper seminar to go into detail. There are many quotations from the Salaf that can be brought. And if anyone wants more detailed information, in fact there are 2 articles which are published on the website ashaa'irah.com. You go to ashaa'irah.com. There are 2 articles that I really suggest that you take them and you print them and you study them, because basically they contain whatever I've mentioned in my lesson today, but in a bit more detail and with actual quotations from their books, and also outlining the foundations from some of the Imams of the Salaf. Like this thing which I've spoken about, aql and naql, you'll see that Imam al-Lalaka'i, rahimahullah, has some excellent words about it. And likewise, Imam al-Sijzi has some excellent words about it. And likewise, Abu al-Mudhaffar al-Sam'ani has excellent words about it. And I've put all that's been put together in an article. It's about 70 pages. So if you go to ashaa'irah.com, the article is in fact a refutation of some Maturidi person who tried to spread the deen of the Jahmiyyah, trying to claim that the Salaf, they did ta'wil and ta'wil. But so this article is the detailed refutation of that, and the title of the articles are The Divine Attributes. The Divine Attributes, the Righteous Salaf versus the Heretical Kalam schools, part 1 and part 2. There are 2 PDFs. One is 9 pages, one is about 70 pages. If you read them, it will consolidate everything that you've heard in this lecture. And likewise what Abu Iyaad talked about as well, because there are principles also mentioned, the same as what Abu Iyaad covered in his lesson. So I really strongly recommend that you go, you print them off, and you spend time just reading through them. All of it will make sense on the basis of what you've heard within this lecture today. So, to close then, I want to make a number of points. Sometimes you find that when you deal with history can expose things which, like if you were to argue with an Ash'ari just about any issue, for example about Allah's ulu or Allah's sifat khabariyah, you just involve an argument, right? He's not going to be convinced. You're not going to convince him, right? It's just going to be an argumentation backward and forward. Sometimes these situations arise, right? But when you go into history is something that can't be rewritten. You can't falsify history, right? Because this history, you can go back in the history books, you can survey all of the materials, you can get non-Muslim academics, you can get their writings, you can go into the writings, the research which is being done about the Christian mutakallimin, the Jewish mutakallimin, the ahlul kalam amongst the Jews. You can put all that together and you bring it all together. You get lots of non-biased sources. You put it all together and you can study all that and you get a clear picture of history, right? that can't be rejected by anybody. The Ash'ari can't deny that, right? The Maturidi can't deny that history, right? So sometimes you can achieve something with history and the historical record that you can't achieve with just arguing on individual issues. Do you understand that point? Right? So when you come and you say, basically, that's why when you come to an Ash'ari now, you don't debate about anything about is Allah above his throne, right? You say, that's because that's a secondary issue, right? What you want to debate about them is, tell me, why have you left the wahi and the naql, and why have you gone to the aql of a polytheist, star-worshipped idolater? Answer me that question first before I speak about anything else. Right? Do you understand? You can now pin them down to an issue that they have to answer. And history is on your side. They can't deny that history. So basically, you have no right to start debating and arguing about, ta'wil, tafweed, is Allah above the throne, not above the throne. Forget all that. You have no right speaking about that. But what you have to explain to us, is tell me, why have you left the way of the prophets and messengers, in which wahi, naql, is the foundation, and why have you started writing in your books that aql is definitive, and aql is the source, and aql is the foundation, which you only took from the star-worshipping idolaters from the Greek philosophers, and the Jewish mutakallimun, and the Christian mutakallimun, and the Sabi'a mutakallimun. You took it from them, because it's all in their books, it's all in history that they are speaking the same language that you're speaking. Allah is not a jism, not an arad, not a johur, not above, not below. All this nonsense, it's in their books. So tell me, why have you left that? Why have you left the Quran and the Sunnah and you've gone to that? Explain that to me first. And let them answer that question. So basically, these people are not allowed to start discussing these individual issues. It's illegitimate for you. You need to explain this first. Why you've gone here. Right? And then you'll find that they're stuck. Because you know that the historical record is on your side. And you know that the history of the 2nd century and the 3rd century of Islam, when the Salaf were fighting the Jahmiyyah and the Mu'tazila, you know that history is on your side. Right? That's why from their tactics is that they will always go to the later scholars. An-Nawawi, Ibn Hajar, Al-Qurtubi. Why? Because these scholars came much afterwards in the 7th, 8th, 9th centuries. Right? And in those times, basically, the Ash'ari spread, in certain areas, they gained control and power, just like the Mu'tazila did. And many, many righteous scholars, learned scholars, they grew up in that environment, thinking that this way is the truth. They never knew anything else, right? Because of the environment they were in. So these deceptive people, when they want to argue, they'll go to those scholars, but they won't mention to you, they'll run away from discussing about, what was the argument between the Salaf and the Jahmiyyah? And the Salaf and the Mu'tazila, what was the argument between them? Right? Because if you go there, it'll quickly become clear that these people are the followers of the Jahmiyyah and the Mu'tazila. The usul are the same as the Jahmiyyah and the Mu'tazila. Do you understand? So this is from their tricks. Ibn Hajar, An-Nawawi. They'll go to these later scholars. Right? So this is from their ploys and from their tricks. So with that we'll conclude. I mean, if there are any questions that we can try to address, inshallah ta'ala, we'll try to very, very briefly. But as I said, go to asharis.com. There's very, very detailed information on this topic on that website, and especially these 2 articles. Then you'll benefit from that, inshallah ta'ala. I'll try to answer these questions very quickly because we are short of time. First question, if I can read this, it's hard to read the writing, but basically the question is saying, where was it gone? There was another one here, similar question. We cannot understand the Quran and the Hadith without understanding of the Ash'ari Maturidi. Every narration of Hadith chain is Ash'ari and Maturidi in it. This is false, this is batil, this is not true. Right? Name me one single Ash'ari who's a narrator in the chain of narration from the Messenger Muhammad ﷺ to Imam Ahmad, Imam Malik, Imam Bukhari. Name me one Ash'ari. Name me Maturidi in that chain of narration from the Messenger of Allah ﷺ to one of his companions, from a tabi'een, to from one of the Imams of the Salaf, Imam Malik, Abu Hanifa, Shafi'i, Imam Ahmad, Al-Bukhari, At-Tirmidhi, right? Name me one. Name me one. We'll give them 30 years to bring us one Ash'ari or Maturidi, doctrinal Ash'ari or Maturidi, who exists in the chain of narration, through whom either tafsir was narrated till it reached At-Tabari, for example, or fiqh was narrated till it reached Imam Malik, Abu Hanifa, Al-Shafi'i, Imam Ahmad, or ilm al-hadith, meaning that in the period of hadith, as the hadith was actually being compiled and put together. This is what we mean, right? Because they're trying to make it appear to you as if you can't learn your knowledge unless you get something which is being transmitted through an Ash'ari or Maturidi, right? What they mean really is Ibn Hajar and Nawawi and the explanations they wrote upon hadith, like, Riyadh al-Salihin, Sahih Muslim, Sahih al-Bukhari. This is what they really basically mean. And also the texts on al-Mustalah and ilm al-hadith and so on and so forth. This is what they really mean. But in reality, those scholars actually inherited that knowledge from those who came before them. It's not their knowledge, right? They just put the knowledge together, right? Whether it is tafsir or whatever else, they wrote that and they acquired that because it came to them. That knowledge didn't originate with them. They inherited that knowledge from someone else. And that came from someone else, and that came from someone else. So the real question is, name me one person who was an Ash'ari or Maturidi, right, between the Messenger of Allah ﷺ and between Al-Bukhari. You won't find one. Or Imam Muslim, or Tirmidhi, or Tabari, who compiled the tafsir based upon the Athar. Right? Find one. You won't find any. You won't find an Ash'ari or Maturidi anywhere. Right? And as for these scholars like An-Nawawi, Ibn Hajar, and so on and so forth, and our position is that these are great and mighty scholars. We ask for Allah's mercy upon them. They did a great and mighty service to Islam and the Muslims, and their works are of tremendous benefit. However, these scholars, they lived in a time in which the Ash'aris were dominant and they affected many of the rulers. They had power, they had schools, and many righteous scholars, they grew up in a time when this was basically the only approach. They thought that this way was actually the way of the Salaf. They wrongly believed this because this was the only, and they hadn't access to all of the books of the Salaf. To all of the books of the Salaf. Such that they could see that now there's a difference between what the Salaf are saying, between what the Ahlul Kalam are saying. In fact, on some issues, they did. Like Ibn Hajar, for example, he refutes the Ash'aris on a number of issues. Like, what is the first obligation? Right? Because these scholars, because they were dedicated to hadith, they could see through certain things that it wasn't correct. Right? So this is how we view these scholars. They are great and mighty scholars. We respect them, we love them, we benefit from their works. But there are circumstances which can explain why they were upon what they were upon. Right? So, let's answer that question. Okay, there's a question here. Why do people like Hamza Yusuf hide behind a school of thought like Malikiyyah and ascribe their belief to Malik? This is something which happened to all the schools of thought, right? Just like we mentioned in the talk, that basically we distinguish between the original Hanafis, Abu Hanifa, Abu Yusuf, and the students, that they were upon the Salafi aqeedah, right? And then after them came those people who ascribed to the Hanafi madhab, but they were affected by ilm al-kalam. Then they tried to throw that ilm al-kalam upon Abu Hanifa, and he's free from that. None of that language came from Abu Hanifa, right? In a similar manner, it happened with Malik, happened with Imam al-Shafi'i. Most of the Shafi'is today, they're Ash'aris, right? And Shafi'i, rahimahullah, was free from ilm al-kalam. He condemned ilm al-kalam. And then they tried to throw their filth upon Imam al-Shafi'i. And likewise with Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal, the same thing happened. There were some Hanbalis in Baghdad, 150 years afterwards, they started studying under the Ash'aris, like Al-Baqilani and others, right? Hanbalis in Baghdad. And they become affected by this. Then they try to ascribe this to Imam Ahmad. And as for the well-known students of Imam Ahmad, nothing like that is narrated from Imam Ahmad, right? So this happened to all of the schools of thought. Many of the scholars who came afterwards, they became like Ibn al-Jawzi, Ibn Aqil, they became affected by the Mu'tazila, right? And they spoke with the belief and the statements of the Jahmiyyah and the Mu'tazila, right? So they erred and they made mistakes. Likewise amongst the Malikis, amongst the Shafi'is, amongst the, But if you go back to the very early Shafi'is and early Malikis, you find that their belief is the belief of the Salaf. So do not allow this to basically confuse you. Just because some of those who ascribe to the Imams, the 4 Imams, does not mean that the Imams were actually upon that ilmul kalam which the Salaf actually condemned.
There's one thing that was confusing. They claim that they are upon the aqeedah of Abu Hanifa. But when you ask them, they say, my fiqh is Hanafi, but my aqeedah is Ash'ari.
Well, that's the contradiction, because it's like contradiction. I'm Hanafi in fiqh, I'm Maturidi in creed, and I am Naqshbandi or Tabi'in tariqah.
They say Malik in Malik in fiqh.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's contradiction.
Yeah. There's, you can follow the fiqh of Abu Hanifa, but the creed is only the creed of the Salaf. You can follow the fiqh of Shafi'i, but the creed is only the creed of the Salaf, right? So we'll grant you that maybe you can study the usul of the Hanafis or the Shafi'is or the Malikis or the Hanbalis as a means of gaining fiqh in the religion, but we'll grant that. But creed, you can only be Salafi in creed, because all of those Imams had one creed. There's no difference between the creed of these Imams. There's only one creed, right? So you can't have these different creeds. Who are the Sabi'ah? Sabi'ah were a group of people. They were the ones to whom Ibrahim al-Islam was sent to, right? They were people who used to observe the stars, observe the sun, observe the moon, and they began to worship them, and they were into mathematics and astronomy and things like this. And these people, they were also affected by Greek philosophy, right? So there were many of them who were basically into Greek philosophy in the Muslim lands when Islam came. So these people, Sabi'ah, are the remnants of those people to whom Ibrahim al-Islam was sent to. And they departed far, far, far away from prophethood, messengership and revealed knowledge. But they were basically star worshippers, idolaters, and many of them were affected by Greek philosophy. And many of them were found in a region called Harran, which is where Ja'ad bin Dirham used to travel to and take knowledge from those people. Right? I mentioned this in the talk. Some of the Ash'ari said to say Allah is above the throne is to say He is in a physical place. Can you please elaborate upon this? Ya Ikhwan, this is straight from the book of Aristotle. It's straight from the book of Aristotle. I'm actually literally quote you. If you to save me time, go to ashaa'irahs.com. Go to ashaa'irahs.com. In the search box, put Aristotle, and you probably get about 6, 7, 8 articles. In one of those articles, it quotes you straight from the book of Aristotle, talking about place and location and space and body. Right? If something is in a place and a location, then it's confined by space, and this means it's a body. All of this nonsense. This is what I'm saying to you, that once you understand all of this, and then Ash'ari comes to you and says, you can't say Allah's above the throne because above the throne means that He's confined by space and therefore He's a body, and this now is tajseem and kufr. You know exactly where He's coming from. Just like if an intoxicated person came to you, you could smell alcohol from his mouth. You could tell this man, you're intoxicated, you know what you're saying. Right? This is the same thing. As soon as you start hearing jism, arad, jawhar, and all this tahiyyuz, makan, jiha, as soon as you start hearing all this nonsense philosophical babble, straight away this man has been drinking from the books of Aristotle and the mutakallimun of the Yahud and the Nasara and the Sabi'ah, and from Jahm bin Safwan and from John of Damascus and Clementine of Alexandria and Philo Judaeus of Alexandria and Augustine of Hippo, and all of these mutakallimun from the Yahud, Nasara, whatever, and from Jahm and the Mu'tazila. This is the language he's coming from. This language is not known from any of the messengers. It is not known in any revealed book. So these questions are illegitimate for them. You've got to ask them, you've got to say to them, tell me, how are star worshipping polytheists and their language and their nonsense, how is that better guidance than what Allah revealed to His Messenger. Tell me that. How is that? This is get straight to the crux of the matter. This is what it really boils down to. How is that? How can you leave that for this? Makes no sense. So, this is the shubha of the Jahmiyyah. Right? We now see exactly where this has come from. This is batil. This is ta'til. This is, amount to basically saying that Allah Azza wa Jal, or the Messenger of Allah, that he was speaking these words, and either he didn't know the truth, either the Messenger didn't know the truth. So instead of saying to this ummah, Allah is not in a location, not in a direction, He is not a jawhar, He is not a jism, He is not an arad, He is not subject to hawadith, He is not above, He is not below, He is not in tahayyuz, He is not in makan, He is not jihad. So instead of the Messenger saying this language, which they believe is the truth, the Messenger instead said, Ar-Rahmanu ala al-arshi istawa, wa huwa al-qahiru fawqa ibadih. And all these verses which speak about Allah being above. So either the Messenger didn't know the truth, and he consistently used language that opposed the truth. Either this is the case, or the Messenger knew the truth, so he knew that the truth really is Allah is not a jism, not a jawhar, not an arad, not subject to hawadith, not above, not below, not behind, not after, not in tahiyyaz, not in makan, not in jahil. So he knew all this, but deliberately now he said other than what the truth was. Right? Or he was unable to express the right words. All of these three are the implications of what these people are upon. That's why I said to you at the beginning, the messengers are a'lam, yes, a'lam, and they are afsah, most eloquent, and they are ansah. Right? They know the truth, and they expressed it with full eloquence, and they desired guidance for the people to whom they were sent. The reality of the saying of the Ash'ari and Maturidi is that either the messengers were ignorant of the truth, or they were unable to express the truth, or they were, but they chose not to. In which case they weren't really desiring guidance for the ummah. Why is it that they consistently said, why is it in the Quran that the messenger, Allah revealed in the messenger consistently used language that to them is tashbih and tajseem and kufr? And not once did he stop and say to anybody, like when he said, for example, to the slave girl, where is Allah? She said, above the throne. Why didn't the messenger say, but yes, he's not a jism, not in a makan, not in a location? Why didn't he say that? And why is it that when he recited the verses of Allah Azza wa Jal, Ar-Rahmanu ala al-arshi istawa, but he's not in a location, he's not subject to hawadith, don't believe that it's kufr and tajseem? Why do you say that? Why all that's missing? Right? So either the messenger intended guidance for his nation, or he didn't. Either he had knowledge of guidance or he didn't. Which one is it? Tell me, which one is it? And you see that the reality of their position is that the messengers didn't know the truth, or they knew the truth but couldn't explain it, or if they were able to explain it, they basically weren't sincere to the people and told them something else, told them lies. Right? So the answer to that question about Allah's ulu, this is something that is established by the Quran, by the Sunnah, and by ijma', and even their scholars, even their great scholars like Imam al-Juwayni, Abu al-Mu'ali al-Juwayni. There's a beautiful narration where he was asked a question by a common person, where is Allah? And he started rambling and going round in circles and this, that and the other, whatever. And so one of the people of the Sunnah who was present said, leave all this, stop all this nonsense, just be straight. Why is it that when the people want to turn to Allah, they want to make dua to Him, that they turn towards the heaven? Explain that. So Abu al-Mu'ali al-Juwayni, he basically, he goes, I think the person narrating was al-Hamadani. He goes, Hayyarani al-Hamadani, Hayyarani al-Hamadani. He goes, Hamadani is confusing me, I'm confused. This is al-Juwayni, one of their great scholars, unable to answer this question. The fitrah always turns to above. So leave all this rambling that you're doing, just answer straight, give the straight answer. And he's got confused. Couldn't answer. Right? Because this is the truth. The hearts turn towards above because Allah is above. Allah is above His creation. Right? So this matter is established by Quran, established by Sunnah, established by Ijma', established by Fitrah, established by Aql. All of these roots, Allah being above the creation, is established. No one denies it except a vile, filthy Jahl. Right? Just to make it clear, this is very important, we must say this. We do not make takfir of the Maturidis or the Ash'aris. We do not make takfir of them. Right? To make this clear, because one of the arguments is that they say, the Salafis declare us and our scholars to be kuffar. No, we don't. Wallahi, we don't. Because from our principles is that a person may believe something or a person may do something which in and of itself might entail disbelief. But that does not mean that the person himself is automatically a disbeliever. Because there are reasons why a person might be saying that. Maybe he has a shubha, maybe he has a misconception, maybe he has jahl. All of these are legitimate barriers to withholding from takfir of a person. And these usul that we have in this topic are taken from the Quran and the Sunnah. There was a man, as mentioned in the hadith, who out of the fear of Allah, he ordered his children to burn him, take his ashes, and to go in all different directions and to scatter them so that Allah couldn't raise him. Because he was so scared for his sins. Right? So this person is denying the qudra of Allah Azza wa Jal, essentially. But when Allah raised him, and He said to him, why did you do what you do? The man said, out of fear of you, O my Lord. So Allah forgave him. Right? This man was not a disbeliever. Because out of jahl, he just genuinely believed that maybe Allah is not able, that if some of my dust is in this place and some of it is in the ocean and some of it over there, Allah will not be able to bring all that together. Right? Because he didn't want to be punished for his sins. But this man was forgiven. This man was not a kafir for denying the qudra of Allah. Because jahl is excused because of his jahl. So jahl is an excuse. Many Ash'aris, Maturidis, they are ignorant of the affairs that we mentioned in this talk. Most of them. The majority of them don't know history. They don't know why their school is upon what it is upon. Right? They're upon jahl. Many of them have shubuhat, misconceptions, a shubha, a false ta'wil, a faulty understanding. This is also a legitimate barrier to making takfir. So this is what we believe. We believe that the Ash'aris, Maturidis, they are amongst the Muslimin. It is permissible to pray, because the hujjah has not been established upon the specific individual, and we pray behind them. And as for making takfir of them, it is only when the hujjah is established. Meaning we have an individual now, he comes to us. We explain to him all the proofs and evidences, right? About the truth, about the true belief. And explain to him the true meanings of the ayat. And he understands them and knows, yes indeed, this is the way of the Salaf. And then out of juhud, he denies all of that. It's after jahl has been removed and after shubha has been removed. But we know that these Maturidis and Ash'aris, they have shubuhat, so many shubuhat. Their minds are intoxicated with this kalam, and we would not really make takfir of them. Right? We have to establish the proof, we have to establish guidance, we have to spread the madhab of the Salaf first of all amongst the common folk till it becomes established and known, so that their opposition can be made clear. That we do not make takfir of them. But that does not stop us from saying your statement is a statement of the Jahmiyyah. You are in agreement with the Mu'tazila. Right? We can say this because that is the truth. Because that in reality is what their position is.
On the maturidiyyah.com, we've used some work from Dr. Shamsuddin al-Afghani, and he has some works in the Pashto language, so I wanted to know if it was okay for me to benefit from this.
Yeah, there are some excellent works in the Arabic language, and I'm not aware that maybe they are in other languages as well, on the maturidiyyah. One of them is a 3-volume work by Shamsuddin al-Afghani. It's really the only authoritative work that exists on the history and the doctrines and the beliefs and foundations of the Maturidis. So if that is in another language, by all means benefit from it. It's a very beneficial source.
He's from Afghanistan.
Yeah.
Because obviously his native language is Pashto.
Yeah.
It's recognized by other
Yeah, he has other works as well on the Hanafis in general, the Hanafis and how they, because the Hanafis, historically speaking, they have some praiseworthy stances, for example, towards the grave worshippers, things like that. So we have to understand that the Hanafis who ascribe to Imam Abu Hanifa, they split into many different groups. There's all sorts amongst them. There's Hanafi Jahmiyyah, Hanafi Mu'tazila, Hanafi Rafida, Hanafi, Mushabbiha, Hanafi Karramiyya wa Mujassima, Hanafi Karramiyya. You have all sorts of people, but amongst the Hanafis are those who are praiseworthy, learned scholars who spoke with fairness and justice. Many of them, they spoke well of Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah. They defended Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah, Badruddin al-Aini, Mullah Ali al-Qari, right? So we have to understand that amongst the Hanafis there are like fanatics. There are fanatics out there who ascribe to this madhab, right? And there are others who are basically who are just and fair and honest and speak with knowledge, and they have good words, they have good statements. So I believe that he's also compiled some works regarding how the Hanafis, they fought against grave worship. Yeah, so there are some beneficial works that you can benefit from, inshallah ta'ala. Yeah.
How does the two different creeds, how does it affect the two different creeds?
Yeah.
How do they affect the slave's heart?
Yeah.
To his prayer?
See, the Salaf understood when this poison came into the Ummah, the poison of ilmul kalam, they clearly understood the effect of this upon the hearts of the servants. Because the knowledge of Allah Azza wa Jal, knowledge of His names, knowledge of His attributes, is something that inculcates in the hearts of the people these feelings of love and hope and fear and reliance and so on and so forth. Right? So for example, if you know that Allah is a Lord who becomes pleased, you will strive to please Him. If you know that the Lord is one who becomes angry, you will strive to keep away from His anger. Right? If you know that there is a Lord who is Al-Alim, Al-Raqib, Al-Khabir, one who is informed, all knowledgeable, well aware, you will strive to be observant and make muraqabah. So all the knowledge regarding Allah, His names and attributes, gives life to the hearts. Gives life to the hearts. Now if you come along and you say Allah is not described with anything, He is la shay, basically you've cut off the hearts of the creation from Allah Azza wa Jal. And if you say, so basically the more this ta'til increases, the more you start negating, the more the hearts are cut off from their Lord. And the Salaf recognized that this was the end result of the deen of the Jahmiyyah. And that's why they were so severe against the Jahmiyyah. It erodes and undermines belief in Allah, belief in His names, belief in His attributes, and the attachment of the hearts to Allah. It is life to the hearts, this ilm and this knowledge. So this poison of ilmul kalam, which entered into the ummah and began to distort and make tahrif of the book of Allah and negate the traditions of the messenger of Allah, all of this basically is an assault upon the faith of the people and cutting off their ties with Allah Azza wa Jal. So this is why it is an extremely, extremely, extremely important topic and subject. And in fact, mistakes, not just in names and attributes, but because of this ilmul kalam, there were mistakes in so many different areas as well. It affects other areas of knowledge as well, and not just the issue of names and the attributes. There's some technical questions. What does it mean that the Quran is Qadimun Naw, Hadithul Ahad? This is like really a technical question. We won't really go into that. Requires a lot of detail, a lot of background. I think that's it really, as far as I can see. What are the books recommended for a beginner student in the area of names and attributes of Allah? Al-Qaaidah al-Muthla of Shaykh ibn Uthaymeen, rahimahullah ta'ala, likewise Sharh Aqeedah al-Wasitiyyah, and the various explanations of that book. They're a good starting point. And the beginning part of At-Tadmuriyyah, with a suitable explanation, has really excellent, the book here, has really excellent principles at the beginning by Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah. At the beginning part of it in specific, those are some good starting points for you to start with. But Al-Qawaid al-Muthla is very good as a starting point, inshallah ta'ala. Okay, some of them, these questions, they require lengthy answers. I think we can round off at this point, and I'm not sure what is the schedule now because it's 11:30. I believe our brother Salim was due to do a talk. I'm not sure what the situation is now, and I apologise for going on for too long. My apologies. Anything? Really?
The modern day Mufawwidha, when they translate the Quran, do they translate yad as hand?
Yeah, this is the other thing to be careful about, which is translation of the Quran. And when we have people like the Rafida or the Jahmiyyah or the Qadiyaniyah, translation of the Quran, translation maybe of other stuff, you have to be careful because these people will inject that poison into their translation of the of the Quran. So just to be careful about translations of text, and in particular the Quran. And this is something through history. This happened through history. It happened with the Mu'tazila. The Mu'tazila, many of them became experts in the Arabic language, and they injected into the Arabic language some of their ideas. And likewise in the books of tafsir, like Az-Zamakhshari, right, in making tafsir of the Quran, they injected much of their poisons. We have to be very, very careful what we are reading and what the source, who are the translators and who are the producers of that material, especially in translation. So yeah, that's a valid point. You have to be careful. Yeah.
From their lies and this Ibn Taymiyyah, may Allah have mercy upon him, they keep saying that Ibn Taymiyyah said that Allah has just body.
No, this is kadhib. This is kadhib. Just if you they ascribe to Allah that He is a mujassim, and He said Allah has a jism. All of these are lies and fabrications against Ibn Taymiyyah. And the reason is that Ibn Taymiyyah came at a time when the people had departed from the way of the Salaf, and he connected the Ummah back to the Salaf. Right? And he played a great role in refuting the Rafida, the philosophers, the ahlul Kalam, the Jahmiyyah, right? And he brought people back to the way of the Salaf. And many of these people, they acknowledged that Imam Ibn Taymiyyah was a mountain in knowledge, that he was superior to them in knowledge, right? But it was bigotry. It was bigotry to their school that prevented them from accepting the truth. And many of them, they plotted against him, they had him imprisoned and so on and so forth. But all of these things are basically lies against Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah. If you want more details, just go to ibntaymiyyah.com, ibntaymiyyah.com. You'll find a series of articles specifically on this point about the claim that he said that that Allah is a jism. This is blatantly false. Rather, in his all of his books, he says that this statement that Allah is a jism and likewise not a jism, both of these are innovations in Islam. We neither say this nor do we say that. This is clear in so many of his works, in his writings on Majmu' al-Fatawa, the initial first few volumes on aqeedah, likewise Dar Ta'arud al-Aql wal-Naql, Minhaj al-Sunnah, and all these books of his. It's very clear and apparent that he said this many times, even in this book Nubuwat, Safadiyyah, in all these books, apparent. So this is a clear fabrication upon Ibn Taymiyyah that he says that Allah is a jism. Really, what the reality is that Ibn Taymiyyah was a very sophisticated person who understood the arguments. He understood what the philosophers were trying to say. He understood the Ahlul Kalam, what they were trying to say. He understood their arguments against them and their arguments against them. Right? And he knew the Jahmiyyah, Mu'tazila, the people of Kalam, the people of the Sunnah. He knew their arguments against them. and their arguments against them, and their counters against them. He knew all of that in detail. So sometimes these people, they're unable to understand what is Ibn Taymiyyah talking about. Right? They can't follow the argument, right? Sometimes he's quoting someone else, and they think it's Ibn Taymiyyah speaking, right? They can't follow, right? And many of their mistakes, many of their slanders are basically of this type, right? They're unable to follow the course of the argument that Ibn Taymiyyah is making. He's not actually saying what you think he's saying. You understand? Right? So these are fabrications and lies against Ibn Taymiyyah, that, he said Allah is a jism. There's no such thing. Rather, he rejected that and denied that and said both of these statements are an innovation. Allah is a jism and Allah is not a jism. We don't use innovated language either in affirmation or in negation. We only stick to the Quran and to the Sunnah.
I think there's one statement in Ibn Taymiyyah that me and myself have read. That he said if you're speaking to a person that he cannot understand what you mean by death, and he only understand in his language jism, and you explain to him that when we say Allah has a body, not like our body.
Yeah.
If you have to use that term, he said.
Yeah.
Have you come across that?
Who said this?
Ibn Taymiyyah.
As far as I've come across, I've not come across that. But what I've come across is that he's discussing the Karramiyah, because the Karramiyah said Allah is a jism, la kal ajsam, la kal ajsam, right? That Allah is a jism, but we don't mean like the bodies. We just mean like qa'imun bi nafsih. Just means something that has its own existence. This is what we mean. We don't mean a body like the bodies that we see, but we just mean that which is qa'imun bi nafsihi, something which exists on itself. So even amongst the Ash'aris and Maturidis, you will see them discussing this issue and saying, yeah, if this is what they mean, there's no problem with that. I've read from their writings that even they have this issue that if this is what they mean, that they just mean qa'imun bi nafsihi, like that or whatever else, then there's no issue with that, right? So I've not come across that specific statement that you said, but yeah, okay, it'll be interesting to read, yeah. How many sects amongst the people of Kalam, you mean? Oh, are you asking how many sects are there all together? Okay, well, we've been told in the narration that the Ummah will split into 73 sects. Some scholars have tried to list them all. There are books which are written historically trying to list all of the 73 sects. But the reality is that there's no, it's not possible to really say that these are the 73 because there are likely more than 73. But perhaps there are like foundations that each of those 73 go back to. Right? There are foundations that all of those sects actually go back to. But if you were to try to enumerate, 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way to 73, there'd probably be more than 73, much more than 73. So it's a matter that's very difficult to speak about because it's hard to comprehend and enumerate all the different groups and sects and trace their sayings, and so it's a difficult matter. And the scholars generally haven't gone out of their way to basically list what these 73 sects are. Some people have done it. There are books historically, but it's a very difficult task to do. And then you're also bound by history as well, because there's time going to come after you and you don't know. Yeah, so it's a difficult area. Allah knows best. Okay, inshallah, we can conclude there for today, inshallah ta'ala. We thank the organizers and all the attendees for attending, for your patience. And inshallah ta'ala, perhaps on another occasion,